across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company this Friday evening. There's loads to talk about. We're going to talk to former Health Minister Jim Bethell about the fallout from this scrapping of NHS England. That's what the government is doing. Lots of other stories around today. A rethink perhaps, and not before time, on the Sentencing Council's decision to say that if you are from an ethnic minority, if you are trans, if you're gay, that your sentence could hypothetically be reduced. I think it's absolutely ludicrous. So does Keir Starmer. So does Shabna Mahmood, who is the Justice Secretary. They've asked the unelected judges, those who are appointed and have very little accountability at the Sentencing Council, to actually change their minds. Will they do so? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about sickness benefits soaring under Labour. We'll talk about Ed Miliband. He's gone to China to tell the Chinese, who have thousands of coal-fired power stations, to switch them off. That's what he says, and get to net zero. I wonder if the Chinese will listen. I expect not. BBC presenters have settled a sex and age discrimination dispute. This is 4 women who said they were discriminated against. Border Force are going on strike, and paedophiles could lose their homes. This is an example in Australia of what happens to convicted paedophiles. What do you think of all of this? Let me know your thoughts. This is my show, but it's your show too, and as you know, every Talk Drive that I present, indeed every Saturday and Sunday show that I present between 10 and 1 and back tomorrow, has as many viewers and listeners on screen, on air as possible. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a WhatsApp voice note. You can send me a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring on the main number 0344 499 1000. Plenty to discuss this Friday afternoon here on Talk. Well, thanks for your company, no matter whether you're sitting at home listening to this, whether you're at work, or whether you're one of the car dwellers on your way home on the Friday evening. Lots to look forward to this weekend. As I say, I'm here from 10 o'clock on Saturday and Sunday, and on Sunday we will be interviewing the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. He will be with us at 10:30. So if you've any thoughts and questions that you want to ask him, be sure to text them in or let me know through the variety of methods that you can do so. Sticking with health, big story this week about NHS England, the body that now the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, says about 10,000 jobs are to go. Lord Bethell is a very interesting character. He's a former Health Minister under the Conservatives, and he tweeted yesterday, "I wish we'd had the guts to do this." Well, Jim Bethell is with me now. Thank you for joining me, Jim. Why didn't the Conservatives have the guts to abolish NHS England, do you think?
Well, because it's a phenomenally challenging, difficult thing to do, and it's going to be really messy, Peter. The idea that this can be done overnight is for the fairies. What's going to happen is there's going to need to be a huge unpicking of all the responsibilities between the department and NHSE. NHSE itself is made up of many other smaller organisations that were consolidated into sort of one mega quango over the years. So they will have to be, as it were, liberated, and that may require legislation. And the people concerned are all going to have to rewrite their job descriptions, find their roles. Some will lose their jobs, but a lot of them will remain in place. And the whole thing will take quite a long time to sort out. So there is a reason why we didn't do it, but I wish we had grabbed the nettle and done it.
What will be the impact, do you think? You're saying this can't be done overnight. It's a very complex thing. Wes Streeting, of course, said he didn't want any top-down reorganisations. This, to me, very much looks like a top-down reorganisation.
Yes.
For patients themselves, will things get better, do you think? Are you optimistic about that?
Well, I think if you step back, the idea that it's going to liberate a ton of money for frontline services isn't right. Actually, there'll need to be quite a lot of money spent on redundancy payments, and that will probably eat up all the headcount savings for a while. So like a lot of reorganisations, it doesn't suddenly liberate lots of cash. Where I think the dividend will be is that for a long time, the managers were in charge, And they didn't actually deliver the kind of long-term strategic vision or the kind of financial responsibility that you kind of hope the managers would do. In fact, actually, they really struggled to change the operating model and the priorities of the NHS. They struggled to maintain the morale of the workforce. And the NHS is notoriously bad at keeping within a budget. So it's actually going to be, ironically, the ministers and the Secretary of State who are going to drive these reform agendas. And things like the pivot to prevention, the building out of more community, and the adoption of new technologies, the three big reforming agendas of the moment. And by the way, they've been the same for years. I think they're going to be driven through with more ambition, and that's where we're going to see change.
There's also quite a number of people, we've got some statistics today, the number of people considered too sick to work has risen almost fivefold since the pandemic and lockdowns. We know that this is, of course, the Department of Work and Pensions are looking into this. Rachel Reeves and Liz Kendall, who's the Welfare Secretary, looking into what can be done to try and get some money out of that. But more than 1.8 million people are now at the highest rate of universal credit, compared to just 360,000 at the start of the pandemic in 2020. We're a much sicker nation. How does the NHS respond to that, Jim?
Well, I'm really worried about this part of it because the NHS has an instinctive tendency to prioritise late-stage acute treatment. It is basically pretty good at running hospitals. And we have some pretty fancy hospitals, and we tend to drive people and encourage them to report to hospitals. But in order to prevent people from getting sick in the first place, you have to be better at public health and catch the disease earlier and work with people before they actually show a load of symptoms. I am worried that this big reorganisation, rather than accelerating the move upstream, we call it the step left, to try and tackle disease earlier, it's actually going to reinforce the NHS's worst tendencies to prioritise hospitals. So listen, the NHS should be involved in stopping people from getting ill. Actually, it's better at treating them when they're sick.
How do you feel as a Conservative that you see a Labour government now with a huge majority doing things that might have just been put in the too difficult box for the Conservatives? You talked about NHS England and wishing the Conservatives had had the guts to abolish it. Similarly with welfare reform, Rachel Reeves and Liz Kendall, they'll face a backlash. They'll have all sorts of different rebels and people voting against it within their own party, but they've got the majority to do it. Is that a source of annoyance for you or frustration that actually there were things that welfare reform, something a lot of Conservatives would have liked to have done, but again, perhaps in the too difficult box?
Well, I wish Wes Streeting well. He and I agree on more things than we disagree. And the agenda that he's pursuing is pretty much the same agenda that we were pursuing. And I really hope he's successful because I want our nation to succeed. And I think he's a well-intentioned guy trying to do the right thing. I am therefore pleased that they're using their parliamentary majority to drive through things that we found really difficult. I do find it strange that they didn't arrive with a clearer, better, well thought through set of plans. I mean, it's been 8 months. It is really
why is that, do you think? I know exactly what you mean, and I think there is still a sense that Labour is slightly making it up as they go along. They're having a lot of reviews, they're setting up quite a lot of quangos and so on. They don't seem to know exactly what they want to do. Wes Streeting previously said he didn't want top-down reorganisation. Now he says it wasn't something that was on his agenda, but he's changed his mind. I do wonder whether there was really a plan.
Well, I find it baffling, to be honest, Peter. I think there are three potential causes. One is, I think they thought they were well-intentioned, good people, and if they just applied their intelligence, a lot of things that the Tories had made a mess of would actually prove to be quite easy. And that complacency is wrong. I think Sue Gray was quite disruptive. They call it Long Sue in Labour circles, and she didn't encourage a culture and a discipline around providing plans. I think that Keir Starmer himself is not very political. He didn't take a lot of interest in these things. We had the case on the Tory side was Ian Duncan Smith, who was previous leader, arrived at DWP with a socking great big plan, Broken Britain, a two-folder plan, and handed it to civil servants. He'd briefed them already, and they cracked on and did a lot of
And it comes in as well, Jim. Sorry to interrupt you, but it comes in as well, for example, with grooming gangs, rape gangs, where I just sort of think the Home Office will have known and will have planned. Jess Phillips is probably going to be the victims minister. We know what she says. We know what she thinks on this issue. Let's have a plan to go ahead and change things. And really, they did. I mean, the Conservatives did nothing for 18 months with the proposals from the review. But you would imagine Labour would have had a plan. It's a very interesting one. Maybe we'll return to that. But just before you go, Jim, I just want to ask you about one other issue, which is this sentencing body to review the objections of Shabna Mahmood and Keir Starmer, which I share very strongly in regard to this two-tier justice, this idea that if you are of an ethnic minority, or if you are gay or trans or have some other protected characteristic, that you should be thought of differently in regard to a pre-sentencing report. Now the Sentencing Council is going to take a bit of a look at it, but in my view it shouldn't have got to where it was at the start. What's your view?
Yeah, I totally agree, Peter. Listen, I feel personal about this because I'm in the frame for not getting the benefits of those sentencing reviews. I'm in a mixed marriage. My children, who do have minority characteristics, would be treated differently to their father in the eyes of the law. This is crazy. This is exactly what we fought world wars to avoid. I think the whole thing has gone mad. I'm really sad that it was Conservative ministers who let it slide through in the first place. I think there's some culpability there. But the Sentencing Council have really lost it on this one.
Someone said to me recently, they said, well, it's because, well, actually David Lammy was writing and said that, perhaps the magistrates and perhaps judges, High Court judges, wouldn't necessarily have understand what it's like to be an ethnic minority or to be from a poor background. To which I said, well, do they understand what it's like to be a paedophile, a rapist or a murderer? I mean, I expect not.
We expect more from our judges. I agree.
Yeah. Jim, thank you. That's Jim Bethell there, Lord Bethell. He is a former Conservative Health Minister. Let me know what you think about what he has said. 0344 499 1000. An exciting moment here at Talk. We've got the return of Alicia Fitzgerald, political correspondent. She will be in the studio in just a moment. Stay with us here on Talk.
We had one in particular that stood out from a guy that lives on a canal boat, and he had taken his canal through Birmingham, that lovely part of the canal where you can go through and there's some nice pubs and restaurants and stuff like that. And he said the litter in the canal was actually snagging up the engine.
A lot of people are just treating this country as a giant dustbin. But on top of that, there are particular issues. You've alluded to Birmingham. Obviously, Birmingham City Council have gone bust. And that city, literally, if you go to parts of Birmingham, it looks like downtown Bangladesh. We should be ashamed about the way this country's become.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who has been in touch, including Brad in Cambridge, who says, I'm a big fan of Ian Collins, but he was in dangerous territory when he disrespected the cats. I'm glad you put him straight. Both cats and dogs mean the world to me. You kindly featured my lovely, sadly departed Daisy on Cat of the Week, says Brad in Cambridge. Well, Brad, thank you for that. Sorry to hear about Daisy. And yes, Ian Collins will be getting a rap over the knuckles. On arguably more serious issues, Jane has been in touch and says, perhaps Ed Miliband could visit his constituents instead of China. Ask the pensioners if freezing this winter helped them towards net zero. It is very interesting. I do wonder with the Chinese, with their thousands of coal-fired power stations, are really going to take Ed Miliband seriously when he says, close them all down, go to net zero, everything will be fine. Another person says the reason Tories didn't do this with the NHS was because the Labour Party would have howled from the sidelines and said it was a disgrace. I think you're probably right, actually, but Labour just can't get away with more. On health, I should say that Wes Streeting, who is the Health Secretary, will be with me on Sunday morning at 10:30. I've already got a few ideas from Lorraine, has been in touch with a few ideas for what I should ask him. If you have any thoughts or things that you think we should ask the Health Secretary, you let me know. Lots of ways to get in touch, including 87222 with the word talk in your text. That's how Max has got in touch, and he says, hi Peter, Labour is moaning about how many folk are unemployed and on the sick, so what do? Make another 10,000 folk unemployed, plus no tax, plus national money off them. Madness, said National Health. Max in Warwickshire says. Lots of politics around today, and no better person to go through it than Alicia Fitzgerald, who is back in the studio, our political correspondent. Hello, Alicia.
Hello.
Great to see you. Tell us about Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary. She is saying mobile phones have no place in schools. Could there be a full ban?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. There was a study done recently that actually said that there was no correlation between bad results in schools and the access to mobile phones in schools. And it seemed to be the first of its kind, really, because most of them seem to suggest otherwise. But off the back of that, Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, has said that actually she would support a full ban, that there is absolutely no need for anyone to be accessing a mobile phone in schools. So it does seem that if lots of schools do want to go that way, they would have the full government support.
And many schools have gone that way, often private schools, and they take their phones off children and so on. There are lots of political ideas around social media bans as well. Do you think this is something Labour really wants to do?
I think it would definitely be a positive move for Labour, really, especially with their need to kind of improve, particularly the state education system. If they are seen to be doing things that could potentially lead to higher results, to higher grades, I think being a bit stricter potentially might go down quite well publicly. Of course, there will be a lot of backlash. Lots of parents have said that they want their children to have access to phones in the days, that it's the only way that they can communicate after school plans. But at the end of the day, for example, when I was at school, you couldn't use your phone at school. And I know that Peter's going to come back and say, oh, what, 2 minutes ago or something like that.
Didn't say anything. Didn't say anything.
See it in your eyes.
Didn't say anything.
But, you know, I didn't have access to a phone. You wouldn't have had access to a phone, and it was still absolutely fine. You could still get through your day, and, you know, it didn't massively impact your day. It wasn't, you didn't leave school at the gates and wonder where the hell you were going to go.
Interesting one for parents as well. Certainly, if the government bans it, well, then it's perhaps easier for a sort of blanket side of it. Interesting one as well about council tax. At Prime Minister's Questions this week, there were quite a few questions from Kemi Badenoch about sort of local issues. You and I know very well that it's about a month and a half to the local elections. We're going to have the spring statement in a couple of weeks as well. Tell us about what's happening in Falkirk.
So Falkirk are seeing the highest hike in council tax across the whole of the UK at 16%. I mean, that is an absolutely huge increase to someone's council tax and to how much they will be paying every single time that leaves their bank account. I mean, it's a huge increase. Of course, across the board, we're seeing that in the UK. We're seeing them rise because the rates were frozen for 2 years to try and help people with the cost of living, I suppose. Not sure how successful that's been. But now that freeze is basically disappearing, and lots of these councils are hiking their taxes up, and that's led lots of the public to kind of say, what for? I mean, my bins are being collected less, the potholes have got worse.
Well, there's so many different places like Liverpool, Birmingham, where there are various issues and the bins aren't being collected for all sorts of reasons, people being on strike and so on. Just go through the top 5 in Scotland and then perhaps the top 5 in England, just these rates. They really are astonishing.
Yeah, so we've obviously got Falkirk at the top at 15.61%, followed by the Orkney Islands at 15%, East Dunbartonshire at, I've got an Irish accent at the end of that, that's strange, at 13%,
Clackmannanshire. There we go.
13% and Angus at 11%. I mean, those are
They're huge. They're really
high.
huge rises. And even when you come to England, Bradford 10%, Windsor and Maidenhead 9%, Newham 9%, Somerset 7.5%, Trafford 7.5%, even Birmingham 7.5% as well. There are really big increases in council tax for so many people, and it is the question a lot of people will ask is what I actually get for my council. But time and time again, as we've seen, councils are actually asked to do more and more with less and less, and they want to raise the money, but it's a very difficult one. Clearly, it'll be a big issue going into the council elections, the local council elections in England, and of course the Welsh elections as well.
I mean, this is just the question about taxes generally. It's do we pay more and do we get more? In which case, people generally seem to be a bit okay with paying a little bit more tax. But if the question is, are we paying more and getting less, or are we paying more and even getting the same as what we were getting before, that's when the kind of unrest unravels, I suppose, from the public. That's when people get really angry because they say, you know, hang on, I'm already at my absolute bottom of my purse, bottom of my wallet, and I'm still not getting the services that I'm paying for, and that's when we come into issues. And I think that's probably what we can expect from these big hikes, because lots of the councils, even if they have more money, they don't have the personnel, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the resources to actually make the improvements that they really want to make.
And they're busy putting money into social care, which is getting more and more expensive, and is their responsibility, of course. Sickness benefits soaring under Labour. I was talking about to Jim Bethell about that earlier on, but just give us the detail on this, Alicia.
I mean, I'm going to start this by saying I think it's a slightly unfair headline, because actually the data, when you look into the data that the article's talking about, it's actually soaring since the COVID pandemic. So although obviously Labour have been in government for a while since then, so some of those statistics can be taken into account. Since the lockdown, essentially. It's soared exactly. The correlation between the end of the lockdown and now, and the exponential increase in people saying they are too sick to work. That's when that data has been collected. And a lot of this is being put down to people who are saying they're too sick because of mental health reasons. And it is therefore thought that the lockdown had a negative effect on lots of people's mental health.
We know that's the case. Absolutely.
Exactly, that they were unable to really recover from, and therefore they have been signed off work for mental health reasons and are therefore claiming some sort of welfare and some sort of benefit in order to aid this.
Big issues within Labour as well about how welfare reform happens over the next couple of weeks. What do you expect to happen in regard to the run-up to the spring statement? Big decisions for Rachel Reeves and for Liz Kendall. She's going to be quite an unpopular politician, the Welfare Secretary. Up to 80 Labour MPs saying that they may rebel on this.
Yes, I mean, this has been kind of the story of the week, I suppose. It's been these reports about cuts to the welfare system, and Keir Starmer and his team very much doubling down on the fact that the welfare system just isn't fit for purpose at the moment, and that the bill is just too large. The way in which they want to go about this, though, and this is the bit where it gets a little bit complicated, is to target the PIP, the personal independence payment. And that is for people who are disabled or have some kind of difficulty, medical difficulty, that means that they are impacted in their work or unable to perform their work in a way that a perfectly able person would be able to. So Labour are essentially saying that they want to make it harder for people to claim this payment, which, you know, on the face of it could be effective. It could mean that people who don't really need it aren't claiming it because it's not means tested. So there are lots of people who earn loads of money who are claiming this payment who probably don't need to. But on the flip side, the worry is that you're targeting people who are potentially clinging on to this payment as their only source of income.
I spoke to someone yesterday. I spoke to a wife of someone who claims PIP, and she spoke very movingly and said, look, you know, getting out and about, doing the things he wants to do, going to exercise classes with a physio, getting taxis places because her husband can't use public transport. That is a very important thing to him, and that's what the PIP payment allows him to do. And it's not about your ability to work necessarily, it's about the extra costs associated. Things like hot water. When you're disabled, you need more hot water to shower, to bath, because it takes longer. So I mean, there are many people who feel very strongly about this, and there's going to be a lot of MPs with a lot of constituents who feel strongly about it.
Yes, and there already are. So many MPs have spoken out already, saying that they've had constituents emailing them, calling them, just saying how severe and how serious this would be, because obviously you mentioned other resources. I mean, it's things like installing stair lifts and railings in your bath so that you're able to kind of of support yourself. I mean, all of these things that able-bodied people never have to think about and never want to have to think about, they cost an awful lot of money, and without that's the whole purpose of this payment. So
well, we'll see how that develops over the next couple of weeks. It'll be very, very interesting to see. I think they're going to take probably quite a lot of heat over that one. Tell us about Border Force staff. They, of course, are going on strike. Will we notice a difference?
That's a good one. I mean, look, on the one side of it, you could say who can blame them, because they have been their job has been very high stress over the last few years. They've been dealing with an awful lot of migrants coming over across the channel and through various other means crossing borders. But then, of course, you could also take the flip side of they haven't done the best job of policing that one.
27,634 migrants have come over since Keir Starmer has been Prime Minister.
But that's not Border Force's particular.
I mean, it is. They're meant to control the channel and stop them coming over.
Yes, but ultimately they can only do what's within the law.
Yeah, that's
right?
true. It's true. But you would expect
their power extends to what they're told.
But you would expect them to, I don't know, enforce the borders, perhaps, as the name would suggest. Alicia, thank you very much indeed for your analysis there. This is Alicia Fitzgerald, who is our political correspondent. Philip has been in touch and said we never had a 2-year break from the council. Last year it was 5%. Now it's 7.9%. I think it's different in different areas. Jane says, I'm sure I heard someone say not 1 penny more in council tax before the election. Yes, Prime Minister, that was you. Tom in Pontypridd says, why are we depending on China for our windmills and battery technology when in the past we had the Huawei debacle because of fears China would have a backdoor into our telecoms infrastructure? Yeah, that was a big debate, and certainly Gavin Williamson didn't do too well as Defence Secretary. He was sacked over that. Graham, alleged leaks. Graham in Bushy says, Wes Streeting has been Shadow Secretary for Health since November 2021. Before the election, he would have planned for the abolition of the NHS England during that time, and to say it was only recently decided does stretch his credibility somewhat. Well, perhaps I'll ask him about that on Sunday. Sicknesses on this. Brittany from the USA says this is ridiculous. It's bad enough with these different sicknesses flying around and not enough exam rooms or doctors even here in the USA. I can't have my upcoming surgery because I can't get rid of stuff in my lungs. It's horrible, and I'm scared to go out because it's so bad. I'm to the point that I have all sorts of issues with hallucinations and so on. Brittany, I'm sorry to hear that, and clearly there are major issues in the health system in America as well as here. It's a very different system, of course. And finally, just before the break, Joanna in Salisbury says we are persuaded it's all UK people that are sick and not working claiming benefit. Officials show that 1.6 million non-UK nationals are either unemployed or classed as economically inactive because they're not looking for a job. Those are the figures on the 29th of August 2024. Well, Joanna, thanks for looking those up, and we will certainly take more of your comments and calls. We will also be talking in just a second to Peter Conradi. He's the Europe editor of the Sunday Times, because there is a lot to talk about in regard to Ukraine. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary and Celebrity Mastermind contestant, demanding Putin accept Ukraine ceasefire with no conditions. Got the G7 summit. Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, talking there at the moment as well. And Putin says there could be a peace deal, but on his terms. What are those terms? Is it likely to happen? Stay with us here on Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, within the last half an hour, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, he's been talking. He says he has some cautious optimism from the US-Russia talks. Well, Peter Conradi is the Europe editor of the Sunday Times, and there's quite a lot around, of course. There's a lot to discuss in regard to Ukraine. Just before we talk to Peter, actually, let's hear a little bit from David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, on Ukraine, speaking recently. Let's hear from the Foreign Secretary.
I think that there is a unified approach that we need an enduring peace that lasts. I think that there is unity, that now is the time for a ceasefire with no conditions. Ukraine has set their position out. It is now for Russia to accept it. I think that there is a coalition of the willing emerging to give Ukraine the security architecture and arrangements that they need, and to get into the detail of any monitoring of that.
Also, Vladimir Putin, of course, has been responding. This is what he said.
We agree with the propositions to stop hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that such ceasefire should be such that would lead to a permanent peace and remove the original causes of the crisis.
And Marco Rubio, as I say, has been speaking the last half an hour. No doubt Peter Conradi has been listening to that. He is the Europe editor of the Sunday Times. Peter, where do you think things stand at the moment?
Well, we've had a flurry of meetings. It's very difficult to keep up, really. But I think where we still stand is not quite knowing what the Russians are going to do and what the Russians are going to agree to. Because, I mean, basically we have a situation where the Americans have effectively strong-armed the Ukrainians into putting forward this proposal, with British backing and with European backing for a 30-day ceasefire. But, there are a lot of questions about it. And more fundamentally is, will the Russians actually accept it? I mean, we had a first reaction yesterday from Vladimir Putin to it. And it was it gave the impression that he was really trying to string things out. He was saying, well, how do we know that it'll be respected on both sides when in fact he's the one most likely to break it? Who is going to enforce it? How can we be sure that the Ukrainians won't be sort of sneakily resupplying their lines? Well, again, how will we know the Russians are not going to?
Well, exactly, yeah.
But I think, more fundamentally, I think in that little clip, we heard Putin talking about the causes of the war. Now, for you and for me, the cause of the war was quite simply that Russia invaded Ukraine. But for the Russians, the cause of the war is that there is a government in Ukraine which wants to be independent of Russia and which sees Ukraine as being a separate country. And, that is the stumbling block that we're going to face.
It's very interesting just looking at what Marco Rubio has been saying. There was a positive interaction between the White House envoy Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin. They met in Moscow yesterday. He said the team would examine the Russian position more closely to determine the next steps. I think there's reason to be cautiously optimistic, said Marco Rubio, but by the same token, we continue to recognise this is a difficult and complex situation. He said it was irrelevant as to whether he trusts Putin. Foreign policy is not about trusting, it's about actions. In the end, on something like this, you can't just say you want peace, you have to do peace, and that's true for both sides in any conflict. Very diplomatic words there, perhaps more diplomatic than others in the Trump administration, shall we say, diplomatically. Putin says there could be a peace deal, but on his terms. How far apart do you think they are, Peter?
I still think that they are a very, very long way apart because, Russia wants to come out of this with a victory. So what does Russia want? It wants to keep all the parts of Ukraine that it has seized already and that it is actually formally annexed to Russia. This is sort of 4 provinces in the east of the country. And it wants basically a compliant, possibly even a puppet figure in Kiev. And, that is really, as I just said, really, that's going to emerge as a major stumbling block. And Marco Rubio, I don't envy him at all. I mean, he's caught between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and he's obviously putting as positive a gloss as he can on things. But, you can't really get away from that fundamental difference between the two sides, and the fact that until now, Putin hasn't really conceded anything, and nor really has Donald Trump asked him to.
It's interesting, actually, because Donald Trump said, that he would devastate the Russian economy, for example, if Putin doesn't accept these terms. But as you say, there doesn't seem to be any action behind that necessarily, and I wonder what happens next, really.
Well, I think the key thing that happens next is that Trump and Putin have got to speak to each other, because both men work on, both men are sort of these classic alpha male leaders, and only they can decide things between themselves. So we had the initial meeting between Trump's envoy and Putin yesterday, but nothing came out of that in terms of actual decisions. It's going to be the call between Putin and Trump, and we don't quite know yet when that's going to be. It could be soon, or it could be a few days.
Yes, it's very, very interesting to see what will happen. Let's just turn to another issue, actually, which is on Ed Miliband. He is in China discussing coal with China. I mean, they have thousands, literally thousands, of coal-fired power stations. How likely is it, do you think, that the Chinese Communist Party says, well, now Ed Miliband's here and he says that we should stop using coal, we're just going to do that? Thanks, Ed. Good thought.
Yes, I'm not quite sure about Ed Miliband's persuasive powers, actually. It's interesting. I mean, the Chinese, they're a little bit of a paradox, because they are making, enormous inroads as far as alternative energy is concerned. Look at all those Chinese electric cars that are heading our way. But yes, they are still hugely dependent on massively carbon emitting, polluting industries. And I fear that however charming and persuasive Ed Miliband is during his visit, it's not going to make much difference. I mean, I think it's more interesting, I think, is the way that Britain is trying to perhaps revive, amid this uncertain world, is trying to revive relations with China, maybe not back to the levels that we had under David Cameron in the early 2010s. But thinking everything seems to be in flux at the moment, thanks to or as a result of Donald Trump. So why not talk to the Chinese?
Worth a chat anyway. Perhaps you can even offer them a bacon sandwich. Peter, thank you very much indeed. That's Peter Conradi there, who is the Europe editor of the Sunday Times. We have a voice note now on the NHS. I'm afraid I can't quite remember who it's from Lee. Lee has sent us a voice note. You can do this. You send a voice note through WhatsApp, same way as you send a voice note to anybody else, 0344 499 1000. This is what Lee has to say.
Hiya, Peter. Lee from Rugby. Great show, mate. The government really do genuinely think that the British public are thick. This cancelling of NHS England is it's like digging a hole to bury some earth. They're just shifting from one side to another. These people won't want to give their money up, these six-figure salary people, like the MPs did back when the expenses scandal hit. They'll just find another way of getting the money. Anyway, great show, mate. Carry on a good work.
Cheers, Lee. Thank you for that. Colleen's been in touch and says no tax should be allowed to rise higher than inflation. Well, that's certainly happening in many parts of the country, Colleen. Chris says it's quite simple with council tax. Labour cuts council budgets and promises not to increase income tax. However, due to council budget cuts, the council puts up the council tax, making them the bad guy, not the government. I think that happened under the Conservatives as well, to be brutally honest. They cut an awful lot from local government and made local government do a heck of a lot more, including on social care. But it's a very, very good point, Chris. Another Chris, this is Chris in Brighton, text me 87222 to say, how would we know what Russia wants when all we get in our media is the Ukrainian side of the story, says Chris in Brighton. Well, Chris, I think a lot of the media are very much biased towards Ukraine. I think there are a lot of them who think that Zelensky is some sort of messiah. We've got to remember that we need to involve our critical faculties in all of this. Vladimir Putin is a horrible person. He's a murderous, dreadful dictator. But Ukraine is a very corrupt country. There are lots of problems there. There are lots of problems with conscription, with forced conscription. We've seen the evidence in regard to that. And that's why on this channel, we try anyway to get a range of perspectives on this. And I think that that has been missing in a lot of different coverage that I've seen, certainly. So thanks for your message. Please keep the messages coming in. Keep the calls coming in as well. We're going to take some calls in a moment. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV and follow me at Peter Cardwell. And I'm actually just going to have a look during the break at my tweets to see what people have been saying. I'll read out a few of those and take a few calls after the break.
We had one in particular that stood out from a guy that lives on a canal boat, and he had taken his canal through Birmingham, you know, that lovely part of the canal where you can go through and there's some nice pubs and restaurants and stuff like that. And he said the litter in the canal was actually snagging up the engine.
A lot of people are just treating this country as a giant dustbin. But on top of that, there are particular issues. You've alluded to Birmingham. Obviously, Birmingham City Council have gone bust. And that city, literally, if you go to parts of Birmingham, it looks like downtown Bangladesh. We should be ashamed about the way this country's become.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
James has been in touch and says, "Hi Peter, I can't help but see this NHS thing as another curveball from Keir Starmer. He came out of the Ukraine debacle, the great saviour of the West, and once people started asking why nothing after 3 years, he's now threw down the ball to take attention away from Ukraine. It's working because his ratings have gone up, but when you look at the deeper side, he's really done nothing again. I think therefore the NHS, he should have looked at wastage in local councils. Maybe he's saving that on people realising he's not going to do anything with the NHS. Does Ed Miller, another person says, I'm not going to read out exactly what this person has. There is some creativity, shall we say, in regard to how people refer to Ed Miliband. Ed Millipede is one. I'm not going to read out the word that has been added to Millie, but it sounds a bit like band, but it's a different word, and it involves shall we say, the end of a bell. Why does Ed Miliband not start his own business instead of using taxpayer money? I could give you the answer, says this person. Peter has been in touch from Croydon and wants to talk about two-tier justice. Peter, you're very welcome to the programme. First caller of Talk Drive today. What would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, Peter. Yeah, I just want to talk briefly on Russia as well, if I may.
Yes.
On Shabana Mahmood. I don't buy the fact that she's not innocent at all. You know, to be honest, Peter, she knows exactly what she's doing.
I respectfully disagree. She said on the 5th of March, she tweeted out and said, "The Sentencing Council is entirely independent. Today's updated guidelines do not represent my views or the views of this government. I will be writing to the Sentencing Council to register my displeasure and to recommend reversing this change to guidance. As someone who is from an ethnic minority background myself, I do not stand for any differential treatment before the law for anyone of any kind. There will never be a two-tier sentencing approach under my watch." I mean, that's pretty clear.
Yeah, she says she's from an ethnic background.
She is.
But like Sadiq Khan, they like to play the victim, don't they?
I don't think Shabana Mahmood has on this occasion at all. I think actually she's on the right side of this argument.
Yeah, I don't buy that, Peter.
Well, she said it. She's been totally clear. She's written to the Sentencing Council. They're reconsidering their thoughts.
Yeah, I know, but you can say it and do exactly the same.
But she's doing it. She's backed it up. Listen, Peter, I'm not someone who usually defends the Labour government. I'm 100% going to defend the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, on this. She has talked the talk and walked the walk. She's asked the Sentencing Council, which is an independent body, to change their mind.
Yeah, all right, Kev. Yeah, I would beg to differ, but I mentioned this to Kevin O'Sullivan, and Kevin seems to agree with me. So,
okay, well, I think on this occasion Kevin's wrong. Anyway, what would you like to say about Russia?
Yes, Russia. I mean, the rhetoric between America, you're Marco Rubio. It's all trying to put a positive spin on it, and then you get David Lammy saying, "Oh, you know, we demand Putin agree to ceasefire." It's not doing anyone any good, and Europe should just concentrate on Zelensky's side and just let America get on with it.
But Zelensky's basically decided what he's doing, hasn't he, Peter? It's really the pressure. The ball is in Vladimir Putin's court, is it not?
Well, absolutely is. But they should stop the rhetoric, the negative rhetoric. You know, it just winds Putin up, and I think it just needs to stop. You know.
Okay, Peter, thank you. That's Peter in Croydon there. We have actually a couple of clips now of what Marco Rubio has been saying. He's the Secretary of State, essentially, the Foreign Secretary of the United States. He's been talking about Putin and whether he will agree to a ceasefire. This is at the G7 meeting of defence ministers that is in Canada. And this is what Marco Rubio has been saying within the last hour.
So I'm not going to comment on what President Putin said, other than he said he agreed with it in concept. So, well, again, he said that at a press conference. As I said, and I go back to the phrase I used earlier, I think there is reason for cautious optimism that something good could come of this. Obviously, we're going to wait for Ambassador Witkoff to return. He's not back yet. We're going to reconvene. Obviously, I spoke to him late last night. He spoke to the president well before that. He may have spoken to other members of our team. I've been here. But ultimately, you know, we're going to reconvene, and the president will have options available to him, and decisions will be made after that. But I don't want to speculate or characterize anything beyond what I've just said until we have had a chance to sit down with Ambassador Witkoff, who's still overseas and in travel.
That's Marco Rubio speaking at the G7. He also talked about Hamas at one point. Of course, there are all sorts of questions about what might happen in the Middle East. Hamas, the terrorist organisation that runs Gaza, saying that they want to take part in further negotiations over a ceasefire there. This is what Marco Rubio has essentially said about that.
We believe they should all be released. Okay, and that, by the way, we talk about hostages, we're also talking about bodies. Okay, and these trades are being made, and they're ridiculous trades. I'm talking about 400 people for 3. These are nuts. And on top of that, you see the condition these people are being released in. So this is think about what we're talking about here. I mean, we're sitting around as the world sort of accepting that it's normal and okay for you to go into a place, kidnap babies, kidnap teenagers, kidnap people that have nothing to do with any wars, that are not soldiers, that are not anything, and taking them and putting them in tunnels for almost a year and a half. And we're acting like if this is a normal exchange, this is a normal thing that happens, this is an outrage. So they should all be released. So I'm not going to comment on what we're going to accept or not accept, other than all of us, the whole world should continue to say that what Hamas has done is outrageous. It's ridiculous. It's sick. It's disgusting. It should never have happened. And we shouldn't accept it as normal, as a normal negotiation. We're just dealing with some savages. That's it. These are bad people, terrible people, and we need to treat them as such.
Hard to disagree with a single word Marco Rubio has said there in regard to Hamas terrorists, their horrendous treatment of those hostages and the bodies as well of hostages that they have murdered that haven't been given back. Those negotiations continue. We'll bring you the latest on that, of course, if there are any developments at any stage. Thanks to Scott in Ipswich, who's got in touch on a different aspect of what we're talking about today. He says, "Hi Cardi P, hope all is well. Regarding phones in schools, I agree they're a huge problem, and outside of school also with online bullying, but schools haven't helped. Lots of school apps are on phones, timetables, homework, etc. We need a school electronic device with a tracker to find the kids on the way home," says Scott. Well, yeah, I think parents have a role in this as well. I'm not a parent, but at the same time I see how so many kids' worlds revolve around phones, revolve around electronic devices, and that's fine in the sense that they can be very, very good things. They can be extremely useful. But if you're organising, you know, the football club or a birthday party or whatever through a WhatsApp group and the kid is involved or the parents involved, well, they see that all the time. They copy what their parents do. And if you're sitting at the dinner table or on the sofa eating your dinner or whatever and you're on the phone the whole time, well, the child is going to do that as well. And I just wonder whether we're silencing our children, especially younger children, with screens as well, especially if you are out and about, perhaps even sitting in a cafe or something, and you quietly say, play on your screen, rather than teaching them to interact with people and hold a conversation. It's a really, really difficult issue, and the schools debate is something we're going to return to later on in the programme. But first of all, I want to speak to Rachel in Manchester, who wants to talk about benefits. Rachel, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I was just listening before, and they were saying there's more people on universal credit now than, what before the pandemic.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they've taken into account the amount of people that have had to move over from legacy benefits.
Right.
Because, I've got multiple sclerosis and I've been on legacy benefits since 2009.
What do you mean by legacy? First of all, I'm sorry to hear you have MS. Tell me about the legacy benefits. What does that mean?
Benefits with the old ones, so the employment and support allowance and tax credits and...
Yeah, Judy, my producer, very kindly put this on screen. Legacy benefits refers to a set of older UK working benefits, things like working tax credit, child's tax credit, housing benefit, income support, income-based job seekers allowance and income-related employment and support allowance that are being phased out and replaced by universal credit. So you think this could just be perhaps a statistical thing in terms of people moving over to new benefits, Rachel?
Yes, it's not taken into account the amount of people that have moved over from benefits onto universal credit, because I only moved over in October.
Right. I
left it right to the last minute. So yeah, it could well be a bit of a red herring, you never know.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We'll look into that. Rachel, how does MS affect you? Have you got relapsing remitting, or what kind of type do you have?
Yeah, relapsing remitting, and I've also got 3 children.
Right, goodness me.
So, yeah, the eldest 2 were autistic.
Well, you got your hands full there, Rachel.
Definitely.
When were you diagnosed? Because it takes such. I say this. I've MS in my family. My best friend is MS. I was on the council of the MS Society in Northern Ireland for about 3 years. I know a bit about it. But Rachel, when were you diagnosed? Because that sometimes takes a long time as well, doesn't it?
Quick, actually. I was diagnosed after my 21st. So in 2000, 2000, I was diagnosed on Halloween.
That's young to be diagnosed as well, Rachel.
It wasn't. It was difficult because I didn't know. I thought my life was going to be over. But, I've been through it with, like they're saying about the PIP and stuff like that, and that is really, really hard to get. Okay, it's very difficult to get, because they're saying it's going to be even harder to get. What do you think of that? Well, I think it's way how they make people jump through hoops. I went from disability living allowance onto PIP, but I had to reapply. So when I first reapplied, I got 0 points. The woman who'd assessed me, she managed to cure me on paper,
She's clearly a medical wizard there, Rachel.
Definitely was. I was going to say it's water, see if she could turn it into wine. But, yeah, and it was soul destroying. You know, I had to read this report about this perfectly fine woman who can do everything that she wants, and I got 0 points. I went to tribunal. Care element.
Do you think part of it, Rachel, might be to do with how multiple sclerosis is such a misunderstood illness? Because I don't know what it's like for you, but I know from my best friend and I have a relative who has MS as well. Some days, both of them absolutely fine. Other days, they can't get out of bed.
It is like that, but I have to. You know, I have to take the kids. I do have a PA who works with me for 9 hours a week because she helps me, around the house and stuff. Yeah. So that's a godsend. Mm-hmm. But yes, to everybody else, I just look fine. Yeah, I'm not. It's a struggle. Well, listen, I wish you well, Rachel. Wish you well with your kids as well. Really good call. Really interesting to talk to you as well. Thank you for that. That's Rachel in Manchester. And lots of people getting in touch about this benefits issue, including Barry, who says the rise in universal credit claims for sickness. What no one is mentioning is that universal credit claims will be going up because people on legacy sickness benefits are migrating to universal credit. Well, Rachel has just done that, Barry, although you did send your message 10 minutes ago, so you win. So while the universal credit numbers will be going up, the overall numbers of people claiming sickness benefits is not as dramatic as the raw numbers imply. Bev in Hampshire says, I do wish your guests would do their homework and not speak out of their ignorance or bias. I'm not an apologist for Russia, but you do need to understand the factors involved. The narrative is that one day all of a sudden Russia invaded Ukraine. That is naive. Please at least check out the history. Well, Bev, thank you for that, and thanks for saying it's a great show as always. Bev, we've been talking about this, believe me, with a lot of different people over the past 3 years. There are all sorts of factors, but nonetheless, factually, Russia did invade Ukraine, so that is it. Karen in Taunton says, this picking on Pip is really upsetting me. I have 2 grown-up and 1 under 16 kids. All have autism and other health conditions. I'm also disabled myself with fibromyalgia. My husband is the main carer for us all. I do what I can. Applying for a qualifier for PIP is horrendous. I applied in late 2018 when I became too sick to work. It took until late 2019 via mandatory consideration and appeal court to win my claim. So at your lowest with life falling apart during that year, the hubby stopped me taking an overdose twice, says Karen in Taunton. You have not had your sorrows to seek, Karen. I wish you and I wish your family well. It is clearly a very emotive issue, a lot of emotional involvement, physical involvement as well. It depends what you can actually do and not do in regard to PIP. Let us know your thoughts on that and the possibility that it could be harder to get it and the benefits could be changed rather dramatically. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Rachel Reeves and Border Force staff. Quite a lot to talk about, in fact, with Nigel Evans, the former Deputy Speaker, in just a second.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. It's just gone 5 o'clock this Friday evening, and there's an awful lot to talk about, including sickness benefits, the number of people on universal credit and other benefits soaring under Labour. I know universal credit, of course, isn't a sickness benefit, but there are lots of other benefits and they're soaring under Labour. Big discussions to be had within the government over the next couple of weeks before the spring statement that Rachel Reeves is talking about. She's facing a cabinet backlash over welfare reform. Border Force staff will be on strike. 10,000 jobs to go in NHS England as it is scrapped, and at long last and thankfully a sentencing body to review the two-tier justice options that the Sentencing Council have put forward. It's about time they did that. It was an absolute disgrace that it was even considered in the first place. Also an idea from Australia that paedophiles could have their assets seized, that their homes could be sold. What do you think of that? We'll have the sport this hour as well with Uma Gurav, the TalkSport presenter, so stay tuned for that. Lots to discuss. We'll get your views on the air as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, you can send me a voice note, less than a minute please. You can send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Plenty to discuss here on Talk in the next couple of hours between now and 7. Stay with us. Lots happening diplomatically as well. In the G7 has reaffirmed its unwavering support for Ukraine. We know that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, says he has cautious optimism for US-Russia talks. He has been speaking at the G7 meeting of foreign ministers in Canada. Neil has been in touch to say Zelensky does not decide anything. He's told what to do and when to do it by his American puppet masters. Neil, I just don't think that's true, but thank you for your comment nonetheless. Lots to discuss, including stories here at home as well. And Nigel Evans is with us now. He's the former Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons. Nigel, thank you for joining us. A lot of people really wondering and worrying about sickness benefits soaring under Labour. More than 1.8 million people now on the highest rate of universal credit with no support to look for work, compared with just 360,000 at the start of the pandemic. Some people saying sometimes there's legacy benefits perhaps changing to universal credit, but it's a very high number, and it's one that a lot of people are worried about, especially as Rachel Reeves is looking alongside her colleague in Cabinet, the Welfare Secretary Liz Kendall, to try to reform or perhaps just take some money out of the benefits bill.
Yeah, I agree, Peter. The real problem is the huge increase that's happened since 2020, and the figure was around about 1/3 and it's now gone to 1.8 million. And these are people who are being given extra support because of illnesses that they say that they have, and I'm sure that it's absolutely genuine in a large number of cases, but there has to be huge question marks as to why the number has increased so dramatically. And if it carries on in the way that it is, it's estimated that the cost of the exchequer, therefore the welfare payments, will be something like £70 billion a year. And that is 1/3 of the sort of money that is spent on the National Health Service. So somewhere along the line, it's got to stop. And the other big question is, why are there so many people aged 18 to 24 who are now also claiming these benefits? So these are the people who are at the start of their lives. The wonderful thing about the reforms that Ian Duncan Smith brought in was that he was getting people out of welfare into work. He was actually incentivizing people to work. We do not want to incentivize people not to work, and that clearly is what is happening at the moment.
How much of this do you think is to do with the COVID lockdowns, Nigel?
I think some of it has to be put at the door of the COVID lockdowns. I thought it was insane the way that we were closing gyms, golf courses, even churches. I mean, for goodness sake, when I go to church, I don't think ensuring that people are distancing was going to be the problem with congregations. So there were all sorts of things that could have happened, and we locked down far too long as it was. I was asking Matt Hancock for a long time. I said, listen, Matt, who's getting ill? give me the statistics as to who's getting ill and who's dying. And in the end, he eventually gave me the figures. And you will not be surprised to learn, Peter, that it was an inverted pyramid, and that the people who were aged 100 to 90 were the largest cohort. And then it just went going down and down and down until you got people in their teens and 20s. And my view was then, and remains as it is now, that you need to look after the vulnerable, make sure that you protect those who are really vulnerable, but everybody else, get on with it. I mean, in Sweden, they seemed to get on with it in a far better fashion than we did. The same in Florida in the United States of America. And I do remember, though, when we did decide to open up, the calls from Keir Starmer to lock down for longer and harder. I thought that was absolutely bonkers. And so the mental health issues related to COVID were never taken into account, and we're now picking up the pieces.
It's a really interesting point you make there. I just wonder, when you look at welfare reform and perhaps reform of the NHS as well, did the Conservatives, as I mentioned this to Jim Bethell, who was on about an hour ago, did the Conservatives perhaps just put that in the too difficult box and said, actually, you know, Ian Duggan-Smith, as you say, came in with very, very radical plans, but he was cut off at the knees by George Osborne, and that's why he resigned. And especially when it comes to welfare reform more recently, there have been all sorts of allegations, which I think are fairly straightforward, to say that the Conservatives just thought, we just don't have the political bandwidth to do this. Now Labour, with a huge majority, actually does.
I think you are absolutely spot on. Why the heck the Tories didn't get a grip with the reform of the National Health Service bureaucracy, which has burgeoned over the years, I simply do not know. I cheered when Wes Streeting and Keir Starmer made the announcement about the abolition of NHS England. The Tories clearly should have done it a long, long time ago. It's the same with the benefits.
I mean, they created it. It was under Andrew Lansley as Health Secretary that created NHS England.
Spot on again. And what happens to people like that? They get promoted out of the job into the House of Lords, where I'm sure people are listening to his sage and wise words now. Yeah, listen, there is a thing that what you can...
Sorry, it's a bit dark in here, Nigel. You've just thrown a bit of shade there. So.
All right, well, I tell you what it is. I think the issue with the Conservative Party in doing some of those reforms, right? Let's just take one for an example. International development. You remember, Peter, when the Conservatives slashed it from 0.7 to 0.5.
Yes.
The furore from the Labour Party. I can still hear, they're still ringing. The echoes are still ringing in my ears about the way that they protested about how many millions of people would die throughout the world because the aid budget had been cut. And what have they done within the last couple of weeks? They've cut it themselves by a similar amount. And so was there furore from the Conservatives? No.
Very little.
Kemi Badenoch and the vast majority of the Tory party actually said, right, this is a sensible thing to do. We need to spend money on defence. And the one thing that you cannot continue to do, and this is the other huge worry that I've got, Peter, is that the amount of borrowing that this government have done over the past 7 months, which comes to almost £700 million a day. It's about £140 billion they've borrowed since they got into power. That is more than was borrowed since World War II. These are frightening statistics. And so what I'm rather hoping to hear from Liz Kendall and Rachel Reeves is economic common sense, sound economic policies, and that means cutting back on government expenditure, making sure that the civil service that we pay actually come into work. They don't come in 2, 3, 4 days a week. They actually come in and work. And I am delighted that the fat that has existed around the National Health Service is finally going to be cut away. The government don't want to admit it.
Is it really going to make that much of a difference, do you think?
Well, I think there's going to be 10,000 jobs that are going to go within the National Health Service. I'm not talking about doctors and nurses and, the surgeons and the consultants. We want to see them carry on. It's like that old joke, Peter, when there was one person digging a hole and 6 people who were managing them, and they were told that they had to save £10,000 a month. And so they fired the guy digging the hole.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that we've got common sense cuts to the bureaucracy within the National Health Service without damaging the delivery of the service to normal people. And I think what West Streeting has done is imaginative, and the government deserves applause where they deserve it. They need to get that applause, but at the same time, they need to get a grip on their borrowing, and we just can't carry on. The amount of interest that the government must be paying for that £700 million a day that they are borrowing extra is frightening.
And it's your and my money. It's taxpayers' money. Tell us a little bit of just a couple of other stories around today. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. The sentencing review, the Sentencing Commission is to review the objections to this two-tier justice. I think it's absolutely outrageous that you could sentence someone based on anything other than the crime that they have committed, and if there are any extenuating circumstances, that's fine to look into this. But Sue Carr, Baroness Carr, is the Lady Chief Justice, and her Sentencing Council putting this forward. Shabnam Mahmood disagreeing with it as Justice Secretary, as did Keir Starmer, and saying there'll never be two-tier justice on her watch. I just wonder whether you think that this independent body, this Quango essentially, is overreached.
I think it has overreached, and it's underheard. It needs to hear better what the government is saying, because the government it's been elected by the people, and it is there to bring forward policies for which they now have been elected. And I got to say, for them to stand up against the government and say, oh, no, I know what you're saying, but we are independent and we're not going to listen to anybody, I think they really do need to get a grip. I always thought justice was blind, Peter.
Well, exactly.
It didn't matter who you were or what you were, it depended what you did. So that if you were somebody in the House of Commons, for instance, that had committed a crime, you were going to receive the same punishment as if you were the dustman who committed a similar crime. And that's where justice should be. It should be absolutely blind. And to think that you could possibly have a differential sentencing, it's bad enough having two-tier policing in certain respects throughout the United Kingdom, but having two-tier sentencing as well is an absolute slap in the face of justice.
Nigel, thank you. That's Nigel Evans there. He's a former Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons. He was the Conservative MP for the Ribble Valley as well. Gary's been in touch and says, I think you're right, Peter, when you say that a lot of the things that Labour is doing now in government could have been considered too difficult by the Conservatives when they were in office. But I guarantee you they had tried doing them. If they had tried doing them, Labour in opposition would have considered them unthinkable and fought tooth and nail against it. That's the disappointing thing about politics. It's far too confrontational, so parties rarely unite behind the right policy. They just oppose it for the sake of opposition. Gary, you're absolutely right. Another person says, as unpalatable as it may be, we must accept Putin has to keep the land that he has already taken in Ukraine. Should we accept that? I'm not sure. What is left is to devise a way to guarantee that in a few years' time he won't come back for more. Putin is demanding Ukraine never joins NATO and that there will never be foreign troops in Ukraine. Well, we can agree to that, but he needs to understand that foreign troops includes Russian troops, and it should be made clear to him that if a single Russian soldier even puts a foot on Ukraine, all bets are off. Ukraine will, with immediate effect, become a member of NATO, and NATO countries will be used to drive Russian troops not only out of Ukraine, but also out of the land they have gained as part of this peace deal. If Putin doesn't agree to it, then we know he has no intention of keeping to his side of a peace deal. Very interesting thoughts there. Paul says the government says it's going to get the sick back to work. That's a fallacy. They aren't getting them jobs. They're just changing their benefit from one to another to look as if they are doing something. Chris says 150,000 universal credit claim increase could maybe be attributed to the small boat migrant crossings. Terry in Islington says 70 billion a year taken from those who work and pay tax is given to those who don't. That is how socialism works. I bet Labour would prefer not to reduce benefits if the economy wasn't in such a dire state. Terry says that from Islington. Lots of people in touch, lots of calls coming through as well. If you want to add your voice to those, 0344 499 1000. This scandal of two-tier justice, this absolute outrage that the Sentencing Council has proposed under the Lady Chief Justice, Sue Carr, well, they're now going to rethink it, and rightly so. I hope they're going to abolish it and say it was a stupid idea and should never have happened in the first place. We'll get the view of Dr. Rakib Ehsan, social policy analyst, on this in just a few minutes' time. Stay with us here on Talk.
you're suggesting that this is all it's all Rachel Reeves' fault that there's no growth.
Well, it is. She's the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Yeah, but normally when I say what public spending would you cut, you go foreign aid, but they've cut that. So what next?
I've never actually said that. I don't think I've ever said that. Well, I wouldn't be giving minimum 18 billion pounds to the Chagos Islands.
Oh, come on, Mike.
Mauritius.
That's 90 million a year. It's pocket money.
Well, it's not pocket money because amortised over the years it's going to be 52 billion.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Quite a lot about we're talking today in regard to council tax increases. Some of the figures are absolutely eye-watering. In Scotland, especially Falkirk, 15.6% rise in your council tax. Orkney Islands, 15%. East Dunbartonshire, 13%. And actually, Les has been in touch from Clackmannanshire, where it is 13% rise. And Les says, given the 13% hike in the smallest shire in the UK and the receding bin collection, worsening roads, general increase of roadside rubbish with deteriorating public services, surely this spells the beginning of the end of the gravy train at Holyrood, of course, the Scottish Parliament. They swan around in chauffeur-driven vehicles and claim all manner of expenses. Devolved power is a failure. Over 20 SNP MSPs are stepping down to make way for the unemployed SNP MPs. We need to vote these freeloaders out of the council. What a joke. Anyway, the wee county is still beautiful despite all the problems. Close Holyrood. Please, still awaiting for John Swinney's apology. And yeah, I mean, Les, very, very interesting thoughts there from Clackmannanshire. 13% rise in council tax. It's eye-watering, and even in England as well, the biggest one is Bradford with 10%. Windsor and Maidenhead, 9%. We know that the local elections are coming up, and they're going to be in just about a month and a half. Full coverage, of course, here on Talk. On the Sentencing Council, Chris has been in touch and says maybe the government should do the same for the Sentencing Council that Trump has suggested for other government departments. Yes, you're independent, but if you don't do what we want, then we will cut your funding. Well, it's an interesting one, Chris, because I do want an independent judiciary, but I also want them to act sensibly and within the law, and justice should be blind. We spoke to Rakib Hassan previously about the social policy analyst. Things have moved an awful lot on this story. We've had Shabnam Mahmood saying she wants the Sentencing Council to get rid of it. We've also had a possible bill by Robert Jenrick put forward to try to stop it, but that's been blocked by Labour, apparently. Rakib, just bring us up to date on this in terms of what has happened and your view on the fact that the Sentencing Council has said that it will think again on this.
Well, firstly, it's very clear that Shabana Mahmood, you mentioned there, she was not happy about this in the slightest. She said that this is ultimately does amount to two-tier sentencing, which is as clear as day. But then you've had Robert Jenrick, the shadow Justice Secretary, say that, well, hold on, Shabana Mahmood actually had a representative at the meeting where these guidelines were agreed. So there's been some kind of breakdown in communication here. It's not entirely clear how this has actually been allowed to take place.
And why she doesn't know what's going on in her own department. I mean, I have defended Shabnam Mahmood quite a lot on this. A lot of people disagree with me on this. She has been very clear that she disagrees with it. She even referred to most Labour people I speak to, they hate it when you say two-tier care, never hear care, anything two-tier they don't like. But she has specifically said on the 5th of this month, there will never be a two-tier sentencing approach under my watch. And she's written to the Sentencing Council, long tweet explaining all that, what she wants them to do. And clearly, she's not happy.
No, and when you consider the contents of this new sentencing guidelines, it's a very powerful intervention considering she is an ethnic minority female Muslim frontline politician. So that is an important point to make.
Yes, it is.
But ultimately, she's in charge of the parent department for the Sentencing Council. And I think that, for me, I see the Sentencing Council, they can provide advice, it can provide guidance, but ultimately it should be up to democratically elected politicians to decide the nature of how the sentencing regime works, and ultimately it's the job of the judiciary to interpret and implement that. But I think that another problem here is that all too often we see judicial decisions being made which ultimately aren't in the spirit of neutrality and balance. And quite often you have to think, to what extent does it prioritise British public safety?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I mean, David Lammy, when he was writing a review document on this, said, well, a lot of the judges won't know what it's like to be an ethnic minority, won't know what it's like to come from an economically deprived type of background. And I sort of thought, well, they probably won't know what it's like to be a paedophile or a rapist or an armed robber or a murderer either, but they can implement the law on that. And that's really what it's all about. It's about this two-tier justice. It's about this idea that somehow your background and things you're born with that you can't change if you're trans or gay or if you're from an ethnic minority, for example, well, actually that should determine what your sentence should be in some way. And that's something I'm just not happy with at all, Rakib. How reasonable and how realistic do you think it is that this will disappear?
Well, I hope it does disappear. And I think that the fact that the Justice Secretary has come out so strongly against it does give me hope. But I feel that this is at too far advanced a stage than it should have been, in my opinion. And I think that just more generally, if you're just seeing how the law works, when you look at the kind of judicial decisions which have been made in recent times, I think increasingly our commitment to equality before the law, I do feel it's being somewhat watered down in any case. And I think that when you see these new sentencing guidelines, I think it's quite remarkable that you have a public body such as the Sentencing Council who should be committed to the public sector equality duty, and that includes being committed in advancing equality of opportunity. And when you publish these kind of guidelines, I think it goes directly against that.
Another story on justice and equality out today about the UK perhaps considering introducing laws to confiscate the homes of people who commit online child sexual exploitation. This is a senior police chief, Detective Chief Inspector Simon Welsh, who is the National Police Chiefs Council's Economic Crime Coordinator. He says he is open to the UK, following the example of Australia, federal officers who have started seizing the property of convicted paedophiles and those involved in online abuse. What's your take on this, Rakib?
It's a very interesting proposal, and in fact, this sort of thing has been done in countries such as Australia, I believe, where there was a paedophile, and his property was confiscated, and then it was used and sold in order to fund law enforcement, crime prevention, and community initiatives, and also acting as in the hope that it's acting as a deterrent as well. Now, I think in the UK, there is actually a freedom for this kind of confiscation process to take place under the Proceeds of Crime Act. And I think that it's one of those things where maybe you have people there who are thinking outside the box in terms of what kind of deterrents we can bring to the table, especially when it comes to online child sexual exploitation.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting one. Do you think it's likely to be implemented here? I mean, this is just a police chief saying he's open to it, essentially, and this paedophile his home was worth about £180,000.
It's hard to say, Peter, because I think many people would argue that this is the sort of thing we should be doing if those criminal offences, if there was a profiteering element to them. So I'm not sure how it would work if there was, obviously there was a paedophile, but they didn't profit from their heinous activities. In a financial sense.
Yes.
So I'm not really sure, to what extent that this idea has legs. But I think saying that, I don't think there's any harm in exploring these ideas, especially if they can act as a deterrent. But then we have to really see if there's other case studies that we can look into internationally in terms of to what extent is it really a deterrent and how successful these confiscation processes are when those funds are reinvested into those crime prevention and law enforcement initiatives. I think there's still a fair bit of thinking to be done on this front.
Rakib, thank you for that. We're just receiving some information. That's Rakib Hassan, I should say, who's a social policy analyst. We're just receiving some information that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, apparently accepted free tickets to watch the singer Sabrina Carpenter's gig at the O2 last weekend. This, of course, risks reigniting the freebies row. The O2 Arena and the Chancellor's box are owned by AEG, the authorised ticket agents, and a former client of FTI Consulting, which has represented North Sea oil and gas operator Ithaca Energy, HSBC, Lloyds and others. If you just wanted to go yourself as a normal, straightforward punter, it would have cost you £110, up to about £600 to go and see that. We don't know how much it cost. We don't know how much that was actually worth to the Chancellor, but this is more tickets accepted by the Chancellor. I expect there are many other politicians as well who have accepted all sorts of deals. We know the Taylor Swift concert tickets was a big controversy a few months ago. We'll bring you the latest on this when we have it. We're also going to take your calls, texts and tweets as well after the break. The number, you know it by now, but I'll give it to you again, 0344 499 1000. You can use the break to lift the phone, talk to Faith, who's on the phones today, and let us know what you want to say, and then we'll get you on air between now and 7. Plenty of other ways to get in touch as well. You can send me a voice note on that main number or send me a text, 87222. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, council tax and council tax rises are really getting you going today. There's an awful lot to talk about on this. Michael's been in touch with a voice note. Let's hear what he has to say.
Hi Peter, Michael from Norwich. Regarding the council tax going up and income tax and all tax going up for people who have got any earnings, it's going up, and they should be honest with us, because out of the 1.2 million people that come to live here every year for the last 5 years, less than 20% of them work, so they need benefits. And out of all the illegals coming in that cost us £10 million a day to keep them, well, that's where it's all going, and that's why the councils are going bankrupt. And if they don't take any more money out of people who can earn money, then we won't be able to take any more migrants in, and the country will be finished. It's all going on migrants, and we know it, and that's what social care is. And when you see a motorway being built that may cost 200 million, well, that's only 20 weeks of migrants' money, isn't it? It's crazy.
Michael, I think there's a lot in that, but I mean, social care is not about necessarily migration. Social care is about people being elderly or disabled or having to have social care for other reasons. And what has happened in the last 10, 15 years, certainly in when George Osborne was Chancellor, what happened was he took a lot of money away from lots of different government departments that weren't protected. Things like the department I used to work for as a special advisor, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And what that meant was that councils got less money, but they got additional responsibilities. So the central government, which was previously responsible for things like social care, well, it put that on to local government. Local government said, hold on a second, you're giving us less money and more responsibility. So it's a complex argument. I have some sympathy. I don't have sympathy for people putting up council tax by 16%. They should be able to raise their money in more pragmatic ways, and also to be able to, well, maybe not pragmatic, but certainly they should be able to live within their means and try to do things within budgets and not take council tax and raising council tax for people who have less money. But I do see that councils do a lot more than they used to, but then a lot of people say, well, what about the basics? What about picking up the rubbish? What about making sure that bins are emptied and there aren't potholes and things like that? It's a very, very complex one. And thank you to Paul, who's been in touch on social care, actually, on care for the elderly. He says, in this country, if you need a care home, you're made to sell your house to pay for it. But if you go to prison, your house sits there making you money until your release. How is that fair? Says Paul. Let's speak to Mandy in Norfolk about this. This is a proposal from Australia, which a senior police officer, Simon Welsh, he's a Detective Chief Inspector of the National Police Chiefs Council, he says that actually we should consider perhaps confiscating property from convicted paedophiles. Mandy, what do you make of this?
Actually, Peter, I was just going to pick you up on a small point. When you did your original trial for this, you did say that they were going to confiscate property from paedophiles. And I really just wanted to make the point that there are a lot of paedophiles out there who are sexually attracted to children but actually never act on it because they know it's wrong. So there's a big difference between a paedophile and a convicted or an active paedophile. So I think it's just, I noticed on your later mention of it that you did actually change what you said.
Yeah, it's convicted paedophiles, but
yeah.
And listen, if people are attracted to children and they do nothing about it, well, in essence, I suppose it must be a tough thing to live with. But there are so many people who do act on it and who cause absolute misery to families and to young people.
Totally. I totally get that, and I totally agree, and it is 100% wrong. But I remembered seeing a documentary some time ago on the TV, and they interviewed a guy who was a paedophile, and it just tore him apart. He was sexually attracted by children. There was nothing he could do about that. He 100% knew it was wrong. He never, ever went near children. In fact, he actively kept away from children. He never looked at child porn or anything. And he technically did nothing wrong. The fact that he was attracted to the children was something he had no control over. But he knew it was wrong, and he never did anything wrong at all. And I just wanted to make the point that there is a difference between paedophiles and convicted paedophiles, and I'm not for 1 minute saying that convicted paedophiles or anybody who abuses children is okay.
Okay, Mandy, thanks for your point there. George is in Dundee and wants to talk about benefits. George, what would you like to say?
Hi, Peter. Thanks for taking my call.
No worries.
The first thing I want to say is thanks for showing a bit of compassion and empathy. You're one of the few presenters on Talk that does that. Now, let's get this straight, Peter. This is not about getting people back into work.
Mm-hmm.
It's about taking people from subsistence level down to complete and utter poverty levels. That's what this is about. Now, this country is entitled to do that if they want, but let's call it what it is. It's now the country saying we are not prepared to look after some of the most vulnerable in our society.
So I think we basically agree on the point, George, that if people can't work, if they're disabled, and if they're trying to look for work and they can't find work, then they should be helped. And I've no problem, absolutely no problem with, as a taxpayer, with that being the case. What I do have a problem with, and I think a lot of people have a problem with, are people who can work but don't, who choose...
The thing is, so, Peter, the thing is, when the government cast this net, they cast it far and wide, and hundreds of thousands of people will be sitting in fear tonight.
Yeah.
Epileptics, motor neuron. I heard you speaking to the lady with MS.
Yeah.
These people will be sitting in fear that their benefits go from, and as that lady with MS said, to zero. 0 points, you've got nothing and you're cut off. And I'd just like to say, for the ex-deputy the Speaker of the House of Commons, give me a break. What in goodness knows does he know about benefits?
Well, he was an MP. He certainly he talked to a lot of constituents, and
just proved would have been through the roof.
I'm sure he spoke
more than one person on benefits, I'll tell you that.
Well, I'm sure he spoke to quite a few people on benefits, being an MP for the Ribble Valley in Wales. That is not the most salubrious of areas, it must be said, and there'll be a lot of people who are on benefits there, as there are in many constituencies. George, what do you think should happen here? Because there is a discussion that, £70 billion a year spent on benefits. Do you agree that's too high?
Well, I'll tell you why it's too high, Peter, and I know this is a lot of people come at this for this point. Nothing. An immigrant coming into this country on a boat illegally should get nothing. We can't start knocking our disabled payments down to the disabled people in this country who have, in a lot of cases, paid into the system to fund people rocking up in a boat.
Okay, I think a lot of people will agree with that. George, thanks for your points. Leslie's been in touch, says Gordon Brown brought in work benefits, work 16 hours a week and rake in more than full-time workers. That did happen. Leslie is absolutely correct. I think this is also Leslie, who says, please don't give Labour any ideas for confiscating property. What next? Hearty words, confiscation, says Leslie. We have a voice note on the benefit system as well. This is from Joanne.
Hi, the reason the benefits bill has also gotten so big, on top of that, is the amount of fraud. The DWP haven't got a clue how many people are claiming who are genuine people or not. The whole system needs a full overhaul. Basically, I imagine, probably a third of that, the money that's going to claimants is fraud.
Lots of people getting in touch on paedophiles as well. Bob in Cheltenham says seizing property from paedophiles as part of their punishment is an unworkable idea in my view. How would it work if the criminal is living with a partner or children? Would they be made homeless for the husband or father's crime? There are already means to seize assets from criminals who have profited financially from their crime through the Proceeds of Crime Act. Such a policy may also create the impression that a person can make a financial payment as amends for their crime. That's a good point. If this was extended to other crimes, would we then start monetising offences? Would you have to pay more if you committed a sexual offence rather than an offence concerning indecent images, for example, says Bob in Cheltenham. Great show as always. Thank you, Bob. Wise words there. Sharon is in Suffolk and wants to talk about this. Sharon, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hello, my darling. Actually, Bob, that you read out, as semi-covered it, is that even though I agree with the paedophiles having their whatever profit, shall I say, taken away, what about the European Court of Human Rights isn't going to allow it while we're still in it, because the children, the partner may not know. The children may well be being abused as well.
That happens in many, many situations, and actually often they are, paedophiles are very likely to abuse their own children or children near to them. We know that, and they have probably, they've certainly, if they've been through that, have been suffered to a huge degree. There are also people who have no idea what's going on.
Exactly. A lot of wives, partners, have absolutely no idea what's going on. Why punish them as well?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Sharon, thank you for that. That's Sharon in Suffolk there. And Susan in the Isle of Wight says, I'm dreading getting my council tax bill. I work in a council-run school and got a 2.5% pay rise, which obviously isn't enough to cover all the rising costs, says Susan in the Isle of Wight. Well, Susan, I'm glad you got a pay rise, but as you say, that's basically inflation. I mean, you're sort of revenue neutral at the end of that. Councils should get less if they spend the money on wokery, painting zebra crossings multicoloured. Stop the waste if they want more, says this person. And Tony says, did that woman who was on not mean there's a difference between convicted paedophiles and ones who have just not been caught yet? What a load of ultra-woke rubbish. In fairness to the person we spoke to, I don't think she was saying that for a second, actually, Tony. She made it very clear that all paedophilia is wrong and acting on those feelings is always wrong. What she said was that there are people who experience those feelings who don't act on them, and we need to be compassionate, I think, in her, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but certainly she said she watched a documentary about that. It's a really, really tough issue. It's a really difficult issue. I'm not sure we should necessarily be sympathetic to people who have horrendous attraction to children. I mean, it's awful. There is a difference, though, and there is a difference in law between people who commit criminal acts and people who do not commit criminal acts. So that is the point, I think, that caller was making. I hope I've characterised that correctly. Within that, absolutely no suggestion from the caller or from me or anybody that any type of paedophilia is in any way justifiable. Of course it isn't. It's horrendous, it's awful, and it should be completely condemned at all times. Rob has been in touch with a voice note on benefits.
Hello, Peter. Robin Starbridge here, mate. With regards to the cuts the government are doing to the benefits, why do they just not stop all payments to the illegal immigrants coming into the country? Stop putting them all in hotels. Stop giving them mobile phones. And stop. They just need to stop, don't they, Pete? Because we all know what the problem is, and it's the illegal immigrants.
Rob, I think a lot of people will agree with you. There are about 60,000 illegal immigrants. We know certainly what there were certainly within the last year or so. We know since Keir Starmer took over that there have been about 27,000. I have the exact number here somewhere. The 27,000 plus people arriving on small boats since Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. Is it 27,634 is the exact number? Has he got a grip on it? What do you think? 0344 499 1000. There are an awful lot of opinions flying around today, and I want to make sure that as many people get on the air as possible. You can give me a ring. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call on benefits, on immigration, on paedophiles, whatever you want to talk about. The Border Force staff who are going to be on strike, will we notice a difference? And Ed Miliband going to China to discuss a U-turn on coal. Are the Chinese going to actually listen to him? We'll do more on that as well. Well, let's talk about the sport in just a minute here on Talk. Magarav is raring to go and a big weekend ahead in the sporting world. Stay with us here on Talk.
If you
lionise Hamas and terrorist organisations, you should be kicked out. And frankly, you should never step foot on British soil again. And I started to do that. I revoked the visas of 2 individuals who were falling well below the standards we should expect. Unfortunately, they then appealed, and activist judges in the High Court upheld their claim, and I believe they're still here in the UK. That's totally wrong. It sends out completely the wrong message. If you come to this country, respect our way of life, respect our values. Otherwise, you can get out and never come here again.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just been looking through my tweets there over the course of the break, and TT says, is there no end to this atrocious Labour government? Paul says, it's a government of service, Peter, self-service. And some very sad news from Wirelass, who has been in touch about Billy the cat. Peter, my beautiful cat Billy, died today. The pain is horrendous. I rescued him when I was between 3 and 6, and I've loved him and him me for 14 years. Gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I mean, I have a rescue cat of Jack, and he is 9, and it is just awful. They do leave paw prints on your heart, and I'm so sorry to read that news. I really hope that you can mourn Billy well and give him a good send-off, and I hope when the time comes, which hopefully will be in a little while, you'll need some time, but when the time comes, there are lots of rescue cats. There are lots of beautiful cats who need homes, who are in places like Cats Protection, shelters, and just waiting for you to give them all your love. So I wish you all the very, very best, and I'm very sorry to see Billy, and you sent me a beautiful picture of Billy the ginger cat, so thank you for that. Let's talk about the sport.
Sport Summary on Talk.
Well, Uma Gurov is with me now. She is a TalkSport presenter. And Uma, Thomas Tuchel has named the first England squad. Some shock recalls for Rashford and Henderson. Tell us about this.
Yeah, this is a first recall for Marcus Rashford in a year. Nobody, I think, was expecting him to be back in the squad quite so soon. Obviously, he's made that move from Man United to Aston Villa. He's been doing well, but still a surprise that Tuchel's taken a punt on him so soon. Jordan Henderson, this is his first call-up since November 2023. He's over at Ajax, of course, after that spell over in Saudi Arabia. But there's some more shocks in there as well. A first call-up for Dan Burn of Newcastle. He's 32 years old, so really quite old to be getting his first England call-up. And then on the other end of the spectrum, Miles Lewis-Skelly at Arsenal, just 18 years old. He is in that England squad. And, you know, we're starting to see a little bit of what Thomas Tuchel's strategy is going to be here. He's been brought in to win the World Cup in 2026, nothing else. And we're trying to work out what the rhyme or reason is behind this. There's some shocks in here. There's no Ollie Watkins, no Jack Grealish, no Morgan Gibbs-White, who's been amazing at Nottingham Forest. So, yeah, we'll have to see how they get on in those qualifiers against Latvia and Albania. But, yeah, huge news coming out of the England squad today.
And isn't Jordan Henderson in there as well? He's 35 in June, isn't he?
He is, yes. As I mentioned, obviously, Jordan Henderson over at Ajax hasn't been called up in over a year. So this is huge for him. And there'll be a lot of criticism, I think. Jordan Henderson's had a bit of a rough journey when he went to the Saudi Pro League. He faced a lot of criticism there, and it didn't work out in the end, came back to Ajax. And he's been doing well in Europe, but again, he's not the kind of player that English audiences will have been watching as much. So he's going to have to work hard in this squad to kind of prove that he deserves his place.
Tell us about the rugby, because the final day of the Six Nations tomorrow, England are in with a chance of winning. How likely do you think that is?
Well, it's going to be tough. England need to win, and they need to win with bonus points. They're up against Wales, who have not been doing well at all in the Six Nations. The problem is it's not entirely in their hands, because if France do win their game against Scotland later on in the evening tomorrow, then it will be out of England's control. But really what England need is for Scotland to do them a huge favour. Should be said that Scotland are technically still in contention to win it. They just kind of need some really outlandish circumstances and Ireland are still in contention as well if France and England both lose. So yeah, I was going to say, Peter, that we're all rooting for England, but I'm not sure you'll be.
Well, I don't know anything about rugby, but I certainly will be rooting for Ireland. Although, I mean, I did the maths recently, I just about spent most of my life in Northern Ireland anyway, but it's coming up to the 50% mark for England, so I don't know, I know very little about rugby, but I wish them all well. Why can't they all be winners? I remember there was you're too young to remember Raquel in Coronation Street, but she was a character played by Sarah Lancashire, who is a very fated actress. She was in Happy Valley and various things, and she played this rather intellectually challenged character called Raquel in Coronation Street, who she went out with a footballer at one occasion, and she said, I don't really understand football, they're playing at different ends, why don't they just all put the goals in the same net and then they can score as many goals as they like?
Wouldn't that be simple?
You can't really argue with that logic. Tell us about women and men's League Cup finals, both taking place this weekend. They're, of course, live on Talk Sport. Who are the favourites to win the first trophies of the season, Uma?
So tomorrow we've got in the Women's League Cup final, it's Manchester City against Chelsea. You'd have to say on paper Chelsea are the favourites going into this. They've been so dominant across all competitions. Man City, of course, sacked their manager just 5 days ago, which is crazy. So they're coming into this with a new manager. He is, of course, their previous manager, Nick Cushing, and he'll be looking to kind of surprise Chelsea out the blocks. And then on Sunday at 4:30, we've got the Men's Carabao Cup final. That's Newcastle against Liverpool. Newcastle looking to end their 70-year wait for a trophy against Liverpool, who've been really good this season. But I think if there was ever a time that you were going to kind of beat Liverpool this season, it's now. They're fresh off the back of that Champions League exit to PSG. They're hurting. They haven't got Trent Alexander-Arnold. So yeah, Newcastle will definitely be going for that. And yeah, wish them all the best, but it's going to be tough to beat Liverpool.
Thank you very much indeed, Uma. That's Uma Gaurav there, who is a TalkSport presenter. I appreciate her thoughts on that. Lots of people getting in touch. Tad says, in defence of Nigel Evans, I've met him, I've corresponded with him, and Nigel Evans is one of the good guys. If every MP were of his calibre and disposition, we wouldn't have a problem. He was criticised certainly earlier by one of our callers. Michael says, whatever contributors talk about people on welfare for health issues, they caveat it always by saying they're not saying it as everyone, or understand. Or we understand, sorry, I'm going to start this again because the screen just jumped there. Whenever contributors talk about people on welfare for health issues, they caveat it always by saying that they are not saying that it is everyone, or we understand most are genuine. 100% for certain, most people claiming for mental health issues are not genuinely unable to work. We have to stop dancing around this problem and call it out for what it is, fraud and laziness. Well, Michael, there are people who are mentally ill who cannot work. That is definitely the case. There's some people like me, for example, who have very mild mental health issues that usually, not all the time, but usually coming to work actually makes me feel better because I'm surrounded by people who I get on with and I like. I like my colleagues and it makes me feel better. It makes me feel I have a sense of purpose, and that can help. But there are people who are mentally ill who can't work, and Michael, I agree with some of what you're saying, but not all of it. Anthony in Selby says, Peter, after I got my new council tax bill today, I rang the council office and asked how much of this massive increase was being spent on illegal immigrants. I was told that that information was not to be given out. It seems like a huge cover-up, says Anthony. Let's speak to Cindy in Michigan. Cindy has given us a ring all the way from the United States. You're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say, Cindy?
Hi, Peter. Great show, as always. And also a shout-out to the wonderful young lady who answers phones right now. She's working hard.
She certainly is. You're getting plenty of calls. Her name's Faith. And as I often say, and others have made this point before, Cindy, you got to have faith.
That's right. And I wanted to talk to you about Ed Miliband. Okay? He's insane. Okay.
Okay. I don't think he's insane, Cindy. But I don't think he's insane. But he has views that perhaps you disagree with on net zero.
You know what I mean? Yeah, you know what I mean. I'm being funny, but and also I wanted to say that I think that China. This is a way to get rid of Ed Miliband. I think they might imprison him for even talking to them about cutting down their emissions.
It's interesting because they have certainly invested an awful lot of money in green technology, but they have loads. I mean, literally thousands.
They're unloading it. They're unloading it on the UK. You know, and they're not going to cut down. They're never going to, I don't want to say never. I'm so pessimistic sometimes, but they're far from it.
Yeah, and I don't think a British politician coming to China to say get rid of your coal-fired power stations is going to make any difference, Cindy, do you?
No, not at all. Not in the slightest. Maybe he just wanted to take a trip out there or just ride his jet or whatever he went on.
Well, he says he wants to keep the emissions low. But Cindy, what do you think of the job your own president is doing?
I do love President Trump, and I have to say this probably isn't popular, but drill, baby, drill. And I think that you guys should too. You need to. This net zero thing is not going to work. And then, people that are going to have to invest in their homes and buy new equipment, this is terrible. Who can afford that?
I think a lot of people will agree with you, and it's a huge expense. Cindy, thanks for your thoughts. That is Cindy in Michigan there. Lou has been in touch and says, "Hi Peter, great show. Linda from Deal here. I receive PIP due to health conditions and disabilities. Why is it this government have to keep going on about the vulnerable people all of the time? How about they stop making us pay for these immigrant hotels, phones, clothes, etc.? I'm so angry about this." Well, Linda, I think there are lots of people who feel that way, lots of people getting in touch with us about that, including people like you who are receiving some benefits, who are saying, well, the money should come from somewhere. But I suppose the question I put back to you, Linda, is, yeah, I'm totally with you, and I don't think illegal immigrants should be costing us nearly as much as they are. But £70 billion on welfare, on the welfare bill, that's not things, well, that's a lot of out of work benefits, and there are a lot of people who can work but shouldn't. And it's easy to say we're going to cut benefits or we're going to reform the benefit system. What's much more difficult, of course, is to say, how are we going to get people actually back to work? Rob in Dublin says, "Oh, you're definitely Irish, Peter. You have that charm. Great show and happy St Patrick's Day," says Rob in Dublin. Rob, thank you very much indeed. I did successfully kiss the Blarney Stone on the second attempt. That's a whole other story, but perhaps I have the gift of the gab. I don't know. Rob, thank you very much indeed for that. Lots to discuss with Bob Seeley next in regard to Ukraine, in regard to Ed Miliband going to China. Let us know your thoughts as well. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is talk.
Well, a very good evening. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. It's just gone 6 o'clock. Loads to discuss in the next hour between now and 7 o'clock, when Kevin O'Sullivan will be here between 7 and 10. And remember, I'm back tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock in the morning. Lots to discuss. In fact, I'll be speaking to the Health Secretary on my Sunday show, Wes Streeting. And if you have any thoughts on what you think I should ask him, do let me know. Loads of ways of getting in touch. I'll remind you in a second. We're going to talk to Dr. Bob Seeley in a second. He's a former Conservative MP, but he's also a military expert and author of a book about different forms of warfare. Lots happening on Ukraine at the moment. Marco Rubio has been talking about that at the G7 in Canada. Putin's been responding. Lamy's been responding. I want you to respond too, and lots to talk about on that. Also, council tax is a big issue that's affecting all of us, of course. Lots of huge increases. Many people getting in touch, especially from those areas that are affected by 16% rises in one area of Scotland. 0344 499 1000. You can give me a text on 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. Send me a voice note, less than a minute, please. You can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring. All three of those things on the main number, 0344 499 1000. Lots to discuss. We will talk as well to James Mathewson about sickness benefits soaring under Labour benefits bill. Huge thing that a lot of people want to talk about. Do let me know your thoughts, 0344 499 1000. Stay with me here on Talk. Ash in Slough has been in touch and says, good afternoon, Cardi P. With regards to the Sentencing Council, this is on the two-tier justice aspect. If you treat someone in an inferior way based on the colour of their skin, you are a racist. No ifs, no buts. We have no room for racists in our independent judiciary. They have to go and be prosecuted if applicable, says Ash. Chris says the financial problem is not the immigrants, it's Starmer sending endless billions for God knows what to the corrupt economy of Ukraine. Billions, says Chris in Brighton. Well, it was Rachel Reeves who will be giving another economic statement, a sort of mini budget, spring statement, in a couple of weeks' time. Full coverage, of course, here on Talk. Who said during the budget a few months ago, in October, last day of October, that we would be giving Ukraine £3 billion a year, and that would be for as long as it takes. Well, that whole issue about what should happen, whether there should be a ceasefire, how that ceasefire would operate, lots of people talking about that today. We're going to talk to Bob Seeley in a second. But first of all, let's hear what the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has been saying on this.
I think that there is a unified approach, that we need an enduring peace that lasts. I think that there is unity, that now is the time for a ceasefire with no conditions. Ukraine has set their position out. It is now for Russia to accept it. I think that there is a coalition of the willing emerging to give Ukraine the security architecture and arrangements that they need, and to get into the detail of any monitoring of that.
Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, he's been talking about a ceasefire that he would accept, or the aspects of this ceasefire. He says that, well, let's hear what he says. This is what Vladimir Putin says, obviously spoken through a translator.
We agree with the propositions to stop hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that such ceasefire should be such that would lead to a permanent peace and remove the initial, original causes of the crisis.
And within the last couple of hours, there's a a foreign affairs ministers meeting in Canada. This is the G7. Marco Rubio's there, David Lamy's there. Marco Rubio, of course, the Secretary of State from America, their foreign secretary, essentially. This is what he has said in regard to what's happening at the moment. Marco Rubio.
So I'm not going to comment on what President Putin said, other than he said he agreed with it in concept. So, well, again, he said that at a press conference. As I said, and I go back to the phrase I used earlier, I think there is reason for cautious optimism that something good could come of this. Obviously, we're going to wait for Ambassador Witkoff to return. He's not back yet. We're going to reconvene. Obviously, I spoke to him late last night. He spoke to the president well before that. May have spoken to other members of our team. I've been here, but ultimately, you know, we're going to reconvene, and the president will have options available to him, and decisions will be made after that. But I don't want to speculate or characterize anything beyond what I've just said until we have had a chance to sit down with Ambassador Witkoff, who's still overseas and in travel.
Marco Rubio there, the US Secretary of State, he was referring there to Steve Witkoff, who is the sort of envoy on this particular issue in regard to Ukraine and Russia and the negotiations. Dr. Bob Seeley is with me now. He is a former Conservative MP, he's a military expert, he's author of Total War, about new forms of warfare in the 21st century. Bob, where are we with this? Is there going to be a ceasefire or is there not? What's your instinct on this?
Look, I don't want to be negative about this, but I'm still more pessimistic than optimistic. There's various comments made by people there. Look, the problem with when Putin says he wants a ceasefire on his terms. And not only does that mean no NATO for Ukraine, which was always a little bit unrealistic, but no EU, which was the cause of the original 2013 crisis. But he also effectively wants a Ukraine that he runs. So he wants a Ukraine that looks like Belarus. The problem with that is that the Ukrainians don't want a Ukraine that looks like Belarus, that's controlled by the Kremlin, that's controlled by organized crime, that's controlled by Kremlin oligarchs, that's controlled by the Kremlin secret services. What the Ukrainians want is a state that is not Russian, but is Ukrainian and is looking westwards and is democratic. And considering about 50,000, well, between 50 and 70,000 Ukrainians have died so far, they don't really want to sell their state out, because that was the point of the war, to try to break free from Russia, or at least to stop Russia invading and effectively recolonizing the state.
What do you think about the concessions that some would argue have already been made? There seems to be an acceptance from some that the Donbass, Kursk, other regions that Russia controls might just have to be sacrificed in this.
Okay, Kursk is Russian anyway, so that was all part of the bargaining chip. So, yeah, the Russians are going to get their territory back for sure. In fact, they're taking a lot of it now. By the way, that encirclement stuff that was in the report, it's completely untrue. And it's really depressing to hear the Russians peddling a line that then gets repeated by sort of pro-Russians in the Trump administration, then gets reported by the media as if it is true. There is no encirclement of Ukrainian troops in Kursk. They have withdrawn under pressure, fair enough, to defensible positions. Nobody is being encircled. It is nonsense. And I wish the media was just a little bit more skeptical about some of these claims which are coming out of the Kremlin, occasionally via the Americans, which is a depressing thing to see in itself.
Okay, well, thanks for giving us your thoughts on that. In regard to what Steve Witkoff has achieved or not achieved, the discussions continue. He's heading back to the White House now. Rubio will be discussing with him and Trump. What do they do next, essentially? Because Trump has talked a tough game on this. He said that he wants to destroy the Russian economy if they don't agree to a ceasefire. How long do you think this sort of stasis exists, where we're not quite sure what's happening or where this is going to go? How much patience do you think the West has and should have?
Look, there's a series of calculations. So Putin is thinking, how much traction do I have inside the American regime? The American administration. If I say yes to a 3-month ceasefire that I know I'm going to break this summer, let's say, it means I won't have to. It means that the continued mobilization of Russians will go further. So the Russians are losing about 30,000 troops a month. So if I say I'll agree a ceasefire, it means, and Putin doesn't give a damn about these people, but it's useful not to have 30,000 dead and injured every month. And so he might agree for 2 or 3 months ceasefire, or 6 months, and he knows he's going to break, in order to get sanctions lifted, so his Russian oligarch mates can get access to their funds in America, and Russian organized crime, which is entirely tied into the state, can do its business more easily in the States. So there may be those calculations going through his mind. There's the other one as well, that actually this is Putin, the extreme Russian nationalist. He doesn't recognize Ukraine, and if he has to recognize it for any amount of time, he's worried that effectively he's giving up on crushing an independent Ukraine. So that might be going through his mind as well. So it's keeping organized crime and the oligarchs on side. It's actually looking at the Russian ultranationalist agenda. It may be looking at whether he can pause in order to get more troops and get more equipment coming through. So when he restarts the war, he can do much more damage to the Ukrainians. If he can get the Ukrainians to demobilize, that means their borders are much less protected, because all the mobilized troops that have been fighting for several years, they want to go home. So he's working out what he has to do to press Ukraine in future. This is not a guy who wants to live in harmony with Ukraine. This is a guy who wants to destroy and crush Ukraine. It's just a question of how he thinks he can best achieve that in the short, medium and long terms.
Bob, I wonder what you think of what Keir Starmer, the sort of alliance of Macron, Starmer and others as well should do, because and how they should be played into this, because we know that I was speaking to a very senior person in Downing Street the other day actually, who was telling me how much that Jonathan Powell was involved in the original discussions here, of course the National Security Advisor. Macron talking about Russia to accept the proposal, saying Russian aggression in Ukraine must end, nothing new there, but he says there must also be a stop to delaying tactics that Putin has been accused of, saying there are nuances and lots of questions remaining. I just wonder, I mean, we know tomorrow there's going to be this virtual meeting hosted by Starmer of the Coalition of the Willing. How much influence do you think they have on this process at the moment? We know they've had influence on the process up till now, but where are we in terms of Starmer, Macron and so on?
Sorry, again, I mean, you've got a Brit saying we've been very influential behind the scenes. Yeah, maybe. And I'm not sure. I'm pretty sceptical about Jonathan Powell. This is a guy who says the Chagos Islands are sort of a faraway place that not many people go to. Yeah, it's like he's talking about Ibiza. So I'm not a huge fan of Jonathan Powell. What we heard from Lammy, sorry, meaningless waffle.
Hard to believe from David Lammy.
It is. It's a shocker. I don't think this coalition of the willing is going to take off. Part of me wishes it would. It would be very interesting. But firstly, British troops are going to absolutely tether the goat. It'd be a really dangerous place to be, even with lots of other troops around you. Because if the Russians kick off again, the idea that we can protect ourselves, I just don't buy. Sorry, it's just no, it's not a goer. Secondly, the Russians have been absolutely adamant that they don't want European troops policing some sort of Cyprus-like frozen sort of border, and actually and the reason for that is that he wants to kick this war off again, even if he stops it now, because he doesn't want to live in peace. He wants to crush Ukraine, and having 10 or 20,000 French and British troops, sure, he can overrun them potentially. I hope he doesn't, but he could do. But then he's dealing with states with nuclear weapons. He's dealing with actually getting NATO to be much more militarily assertive if he wants to actually go steaming through NATO lines or coalition of the willing lines somewhere in eastern Ukraine. So he doesn't want that diplomatic and military headache to deal with. So I don't think, again, I'll be amazed if it does happen. I'll be quite surprised. I don't think it's going to happen. I may be wrong.
Bob, thank you. That's Dr. Bob Seeley there, who is a military expert, author of Total War, about new forms of warfare in the 21st century. He's also a former Conservative MP. What do you think about what he's been saying there? 0344 499 1000. Quite a lot more about Nigel Evans. People seem to have lots of opinions on Nigel Evans. He's the former Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, who was on a little bit earlier on. Teresa in Lancashire says, Nigel Evans was my MP for 30 years. I will never forgive him and the Conservatives for letting me down after 5 years complaining about migration. He's just talking the talk. Gary says, the reason we have to accept Putin has got to keep the land he already has taken in Ukraine is because weak and woke European leaders don't have the guts to do what's necessary to kick him out. If you disagree, then I have to ask why you think they haven't thrown him out by now. After all, he's been in Crimea and the Donbass for over 10 years. Fair point, Gary. Tony says, increased council tax is only helping to plug the overspend by the councils on things we don't need. It's no surprise that some of the highest tax rises are in Scotland. That's true. Falkirk 16%, for example, is the highest one in the UK. Tony continues, before council tax, poll tax was forced on Scotland. First, we need tougher independent checks on how councils spending public money to cut out wastage. It's hard enough with budgets being squeezed every time. Great show, says Tony in Glasgow, so thank you for that. Brian says, if they're going to monetise crime, including paedophilia, will they also monetise illegal entry to the country, which is a crime, is it not? It is indeed, Brian, that's why it's illegal immigration. Clive in Solihull says, seizing the assets of convicted paedophiles is unworkable because of the law and the ECHR. They should be permanently chemically castrated. End of problem. Paul says council tax paying for driving lessons and tests for illegal immigrants. Is the tax going up so the council can buy them a car if they pass their test? No, I don't think that's the case. And Mac says, why is it it's always the poorest and most vulnerable who have to take cuts in their benefits? What about taxing the more well-off who can take a bigger hit? The most poor and vulnerable are an easy target. What about tackling tax dodgers? Think of how much money that would bring into the country. Well, Mac, very good point, but again, expensive, complicated. And I don't know about you, but HMRC, anytime you deal with them, they're just absolutely rubbish. David has been in touch on council tax with a voice note. Let's hear from David talking about council tax.
Hi Peter, David from Derby. Great show. I just wanted to mention about people that live on, like ourselves, live on a new build estate. We pay council tax, obviously, but then we also have to pay a managed fee for an agency to actually then come and sort of cut the grass, do all the stuff that you might expect the council to do, because they've not got the capacity to do it. Costs about 160 quid a year, about £15 a month, something along those lines. And then you also pay the council tax. So I'm paying double here because they don't actually do what the council tax what you're paying for. So yeah, just a thought.
It's a very good point, David, and I think a lot of people will say cutting the verges, picking up the rubbish, those are the very, very basic things. Filling potholes, those are the very, very basic things that councils should do. A lot of councils don't do it. They have been given a lot of extra responsibilities, but get the basics right and then people won't be worried. Well, they will be worried about paying a council tax because it's a tax and it's an expense, but perhaps they won't just be as begrudging because, there are a lot of people who wonder what do you actually get for your council tax? We're going to talk to James Mathewson in a second. He's a former Labour spokesman about all these issues, including the welfare reforms, about Ed Miliband in China, asking them not to use coal. Good luck with that one, Ed. James Mathewson will be with us in just a second. Stay with us here on Talk.
If you lionise Hamas and terrorist organisations, you should be kicked out. And frankly, you should never step foot on British soil again. And I started to do that. I revoked the visas of 2 individuals who were falling well below the standards we should expect. Unfortunately, they then appealed, and activist judges in the High Court upheld their claim, and I believe they're still here in the UK. That's totally wrong. It sends out completely the wrong message. If you come to this country, respect our way of life, respect our values. Otherwise, you can get out and never come here again.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Rob has been in touch and said, it would be nice if one day I heard somebody show appreciation to the rest of society for the payments they do get. All I ever hear are people moaning about how little they get, and most have never ever paid enough into the system to cover the amounts they take out. Andy in Bridgend says, good evening, Peter. I recently put a Freedom of Information request into the Welsh Government asking how many people are waiting to be diagnosed with ADHD. The figures are in the thousands. If everyone on that waiting list claims PIP for that condition, it will cost the taxpayer an extra £45 million a year. This is just in Wales. How does this benefit those people? Jane says, the answer to the question that I haven't heard is why it took President Trump to discuss peace. Why wasn't it discussed when Biden was president? Jane, really good point. I think that's actually the message of this show so far, the best one I've received. There's a lot of really, really good thoughts. But Jane, very, very good point. And I've been saying it for 3 years. I've been saying, what does the end of this war look like? How do we get to peace? How do we end this? Rather than simply saying, in Ukraine, yeah, send them more and more money and send them more and more munitions and more training to fight the Russians. Okay, fair enough if that's your decision, if that's what your country believes. But how does it end? And finally, Donald Trump asked that question, and now we might just be getting an answer, and not before time. Nick says, how do you cope with such depressing news all the time? You seem so calm and happy-go-lucky, yet life is so unfair, depressing with no sign of things improving any time. What's your secret? Oh gosh, sorry, I didn't really read that before I read it out. Nick, yeah, there is a lot of depressing news around, but there's a lot of good in the world. There are a lot of good people. There are a lot of people who want to help, and I like to think the best of people until people prove otherwise. I know that perhaps makes me naive in some way, but yeah, there's a lot of good people who want to solve things and make things better. There are a lot of bad people as well, and we call them out. But I love this job. It's a real privilege to do this job. I love talking to people. I love getting messages from people, and it's just a wonderful job. It's I've worked for a long time to get here, and it's a real privilege to speak to people right across the country and beyond. Cindy was in the United States today, and if you do want to talk to me about any of the issues we're discussing today, including what we're going to talk to James Mathewson about now, it's 0344 499 1000. James is a former Labour spokesman. He is with us now, and a big battle ahead, I think, in the Labour Party, James, for Liz Kendall, the Welfare Secretary. We've got Rachel Reeves thinking about her spring statement in a couple of weeks, Keir Starmer as well, and some noises as well, perhaps you've been hearing them, of quite a number of MPs, even members of the Cabinet, not particularly happy if there are to be welfare cuts. How realistic do you think those cuts will have to be, and what do you think the political fallout will be?
You're absolutely right, Peter. The noises aren't quiet. That's for certain. I'm sure many of your viewers have heard those noises already, if not directly from the Cabinet. They're being relayed to backbench MPs and being put out into the press regardless. This is no secret that this is a big issue of contention in the Labour Party, because the Labour Party has to remember what it was elected for, why it was elected, the circumstances of that election, of course, and how difficult that was. But at the same time, it needs to remember why it exists and what its principles are, the reason it was created, and the reason why we need a Labour Party when we already have a Conservative Party who normally are not too concerned about cutting welfare when it's needed to be done. So what's the point of this? What does Labour look like in power? Which is a question, many people have been asking for a long time now. Just as soon as we were getting close to that, and I think a lot of the world stage, the foreign affairs stuff, that was looking really good and looking really positive, and there was, kind of praise across the political spectrum for Keir Starmer and how he was handling that. And then all these domestic issues that seem to come out, it's just more questions that I'm being asked by people every day, which is, what does the Labour Party stand for? And is it what I thought it stood for?
Do you know?
No, I mean, not this Labour Party. I think what's happening is I see the party, I see the structures that are there, I see the members, I see, the affiliated organisations like the trade unions and MPs certainly who I know what they believe, the likes of Angela Rayner, but I'm seeing them having to compromise those values because of decisions taken the leadership side.
But that's government, isn't it? To govern is to choose, and £70 billion a year for a welfare budget, that's just totally unsustainable, isn't it?
It is, but Peter, you're a conservative, and that's.
I'm not actually. I'm not a member of any political party.
Well, but your politics lean conservative is what I mean. Not a member of the party. I mean, your politics are to the other side of mine.
Sure.
But we look at doing things in a different way, don't we? We look at the same problems, and we would agree at least that there needs to be a different approach from different political parties. And the Labour Party, at its core, the Labour Party that I joined, was one that supports the existence of welfare. And of course, that doesn't mean kind of unchecked, rampant welfare. I understand that, but it has to mean that there are priorities in place. And whilst huge energy companies are registering gargantuan profits, and as one of your callers or texters said earlier, you've still got wealthy people, paying very little tax in some areas of the economy. Then why would you focus your attention as a priority on welfare when that's not the Labour Party's job to do?
I wonder what you think, actually, speaking about, I know that this might seem like a trivial issue, it might seem a tangential issue, but actually I think it's important, because what you're talking about is what Labour is like, how Labour governs, and how the people at the top of that party govern. We've heard in the last hour or so that Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, has accepted tickets to watch Sabrina Carpenter's gig at the O2 last weekend. And there are people thinking this might reignite the freebies row. The box is owned by a company called AEG. And ticket prices, if you just want to go as a punter, started at £58 apparently originally, but you're talking probably 100 or many hundreds of pounds to go. Do you think this matters? Do you think this is significant? Do you think this is yet another aspect of the freebies that many people in government and of all governments and politicians of all stripes have accepted? We saw there was quite a major furore over Taylor Swift tickets previously.
Yeah, I don't know where I stand on this, to be honest, Peter, because on one hand, I understand that, being in government is a difficult job. I understand that, there aren't huge privileges that come with the role. I understand that.
There are many significant privileges that come with being in government. Now, come on.
Well, there are, yes, certainly. But I mean, when it comes to things like, these freebies and giveaways and stuff, I'm not entirely opposed to things when they make sense to the role and to the job. How tickets to concerts do that, I don't know. I can't square that circle in my mind. I would be more on side with people receiving things to help them do their job in a more efficient way or a better way. When it comes to the clothing or the suits that Keir Starmer received, things like that, as long as they're registered, I don't have a huge issue. But tickets to concerts and entertainment things and sports packages and all the rest of it, I don't understand why it needs to be done. And I think many people will think the same.
But you think it's okay for Lord Ali to pay for Keir Starmer's suits and glasses?
Yeah, if it's registered, I have no issue with that. I mean, if you register it, then people can make up their own mind and make a decision.
And many people certainly have done that. Let me ask you about Ed Miliband going to China and saying that they should not use coal as much. I'm not sure the Chinese are going to listen and say, Ed, great point. Do you know what? Shut down those thousands of coal-fired power stations. Ed Miliband says we should stop.
Yeah, and the wording of it's very interesting in this, because it's been a U-turn. By that department, by Ed's department, because initially they said they weren't going to bring this up or weren't going to tackle it. They were just going to go out and do their normal kind of spiel about investment and, sharing best practice. But the way that they've worded it now in this press release, specifically about coal, is, I think it says something along the lines of sharing our process.
Sharing our process, wow.
For kind of sharing our process and how we've phased out that, as if we're going to say to them, well, if you really want to do this, which they don't, it seems, then you can do it this way. So it's not even aggressive language. It's not forthright. It's not like they're going there and saying this is what you need to do and this is what you should be doing, which many people think they should be taking that kind of stance. It's very soft, and it's very soft power-ish language. So I don't even know what the benefit of that is. Maybe just so that it can save their backsides, I think, to some of the economic side of the lobby.
There was a very interesting bit of The Simpsons, a very funny bit of The Simpsons some years ago, where a politician is asked and said, what would you say is our greatest natural resource? And he says, well, it's definitely our children. And the interviewer goes, I'd have gone with coal, but okay. It's a great line. One more question. Let's ask about Bridget Phillipson and mobile phones. She says they have no place in schools. She gives full backing to a ban. What do you think about this, James? And what is the Labour grassroots likely to think about this?
I just don't understand the like I do on one hand I understand the concerns that parents and teachers have raised and that they've had with smartphones in schools, because phones aren't just phones anymore. We know that. When I was at school, people had a phone that could play music and that could text and that could ring each other on. They didn't have access to the internet, so there is a different thing. But a part of me thinks that every workplace has phones in it. People will always have phones on their person, for the rest of the future now, and that's only going to increase. It's very difficult to try and phase that out. And I don't know what this message is from the party at the moment on education. It's the same with the welfare benefit stuff. It's the same with the immigration stuff. Like, I get that many of your viewers will agree with these things, but many of your viewers shouldn't agree with what the Labour Party is doing in power. What is the Labour Party meant to be? It's meant to be progressive. It's meant to look at alternative ways of doing things. It just feels very old-fashioned. It feels like they're trying to wear the outfit or the costume or disguise of a disciplinarian. And I just don't think it'll go down well. And especially teachers who are already overworked, trying to enforce this. I mean, what's the wider strategy? Well, you ban smartphones, then who deals with it? The parents, the teachers? It just doesn't seem like a priority right now in education for me.
James, thank you. I understand it's your birthday this weekend. You're hitting the big 3-1, so I wish you all the best for that. That's James Matthewson there, who's a former Labour spokesman. Lots to discuss there. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk to my favourite military analyst next. That's Colonel Simon Diggins. He will give us his thoughts on what Marco Rubio has been saying. What is the prospect of peace in Ukraine, and what do you think about that? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A bit of reaction to the Rachel Reeves story here. She has accepted tickets to Sabrina Carpenter, saying, please, 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 let me go to that. David Perry has been in touch and says that woman and her old man, he is a senior civil servant, her husband, get paid the thick end of 400,000 quid a year between them. That's around £240,000 after tax, or £20,000 per month. And she takes freebies. She has no shame and no class, and she calls herself a socialist. Graham said, I thought Starmer said no one in his party would be accepting freebies anymore. Well, they said that the ministerial code would be updated, but they weren't going to ban people from that. Someone asking as as well. Nigel Farage apparently at the Cheltenham Gold Cup today. Did he pay for that to get in there? Yeah, I suppose that's a question worth asking. Phil Helena also says, very nice message here actually, says, as someone who's currently struggling with anxiety, it always means so much to hear people like yourself admitting to experiencing the same struggle. Yes, I have depression and anxiety. I take pills for it every single day, and I'm very happy to talk about it because that normalises it and says that even people who do my job, which, yeah, it takes a level of confidence to do it, suffer from, have the demons and have depression and anxiety, but very well managed, and lots of people help me with that, including my brilliant psychiatrist. Mabel says, why has it progressed so far in regard to this two-tier justice that the Justice Secretary knew before the Justice Secretary knew anything about it? I thought she was responsible for justice and would have been consulted at an early stage. Another quango running gov.uk, says this person, so thank you for that. And yeah, just to clarify, ministers will not be banned from accepting gifts, but the ministerial code has been updated to require them to consider the need to maintain the public's confidence and standards of propriety when deciding whether to do so. It is a well-established and recognised rule that ministers should not accept any gifts, hospitality or service which would or might reasonably appear to compromise their judgment or place them under an obligation to people or organisations that might try inappropriately to influence their work in government. There's no suggestion that Rachel Reeves has been inappropriately influenced in this way, but it is something that our viewers and listeners certainly want to talk about. Right then, let's talk about Ukraine, and we're going to hear what Marco Rubio has been saying in a second. David Lammy's been talking about this as well in regard to whether there'll be a ceasefire, should there be a ceasefire, what's going to happen, what is Putin saying about it as well. We'll hear from him, but let's hear from David Lammy first.
I think that there is a unified approach that we need, an enduring peace that lasts. I think that there is unity, that now is the time for a ceasefire with no conditions. Ukraine has set their position out. It is now for Russia to accept it. I think that there is a coalition of the willing emerging to give Ukraine the security architecture and arrangements that they need, and to get into the detail of any monitoring of that.
Vladimir Putin has responded too, of course.
We agree with the propositions to stop hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that such ceasefire should be such that would lead to a permanent peace and remove the initial, original causes of the crisis.
Well, the G7 foreign ministers meeting has been happening in Canada. David Lammy was speaking from there, and Marco Rubio, who is the Secretary of State in America, essentially their foreign secretary, he's been mentioning this too, talking about the nature of the ceasefire and what he thinks should happen.
So I'm not going to comment on what President Putin said, other than he said he agreed with it in concept. So, well, again, he said that at a press conference. As I said, and I go back to the phrase I used earlier, I think there is reason for cautious optimism that something good could come of this. Obviously, we're going to wait for Ambassador Witkoff to return. He's not back yet. We're going to reconvene. Obviously, I spoke to him late last night. He spoke to the president well before that. He may have spoken to other members of our team. I've been here. But ultimately, we're going to reconvene, and the president will have options available to him, and decisions will be made after that. But I don't want to speculate or characterize anything beyond what I've just said until we have had a chance to sit down with Ambassador Witkoff, who's still overseas and in travel.
Marco Rubio there, the US Secretary of State. Let's speak to Colonel Simon Diggins, military and defence analyst. He, of course, is a former senior military officer. Simon, where are we with this? Where's it going?
I think we're in that very delicate stage at the moment where the broad outline of what might be potential ceasefire, let alone a peace act, but a ceasefire, are in place. But there's still, as Secretary Rubio has said, there are conversations we had, primarily, most importantly, between President Putin and President Trump. And I do not think that whatever has been agreed will come to any fruition until those two have spoken. One of the things that Russia is always after is what it calls respect, a recognition that it's a kind of equal partner, it's a great power, and that it should be listened to. And as far as President Putin's concerned, the only person who he regards as his peer is President Trump. So regardless of the kind of conversations that are happening at foreign secretary level, so Rubio, Lammy, or even Ambassador Witkoff, until that conversation taking place between Trump and Putin, then there will be no ceasefire.
How much patience does Trump have, and how much patience should he have?
Well, he's going to need a lot of patience because Putin is a master at delaying. He's a master at stringing things out, and that's exactly what he intends to do. All the time, he's continuing to put pressure on. Sorry, forgive me. That's part of my phone going wrong.
No worries. Happens to the best of us, Simon.
Thank you. You're very kind. All the time, he's trying to put pressure on them. A lot of fighting going on at the moment around the incursion that the Ukrainians achieved into the Kursk area, and Putin was very ruthless about that. He said the only option left to the Ukrainian troops is surrender or die. So there's no question at the moment that there will be the fighting will continue up to and including the actual time of a ceasefire. I do not think he's going to give any kind of room or space before then.
Do you think people were naive about this, perhaps, because there were people saying, oh, well, they're discussing a ceasefire, yet still there have been drone attacks on Kyiv, for example? I mean, this is the ruthless Vladimir Putin here. He isn't going to ease off the pressure. In fact, I wonder what you think about the thought that he might even up the pressure to make a ceasefire even more of a prize, essentially.
No, I think he's that. I mean, he's got a maximalist position, which is he wants to take over all 4 provinces. Now, he claims that the reasons for the initial invasion in February 22 was against what he saw as leave aside the kind of rhetoric about sort of Nazi drug lords who had taken over Ukraine. He still had a whole issue with other things as well, about the membership of NATO and all those kind of issues, and those haven't gone away. And I think those are the issues that he said are in the background. That's where he's talking about the kind of root causes of all this and wanting to make sure those root causes are addressed or at least acknowledged. I don't think they can be fully addressed, but they are, I think, going to be acknowledged. And that's where the conversation present to present is going to be very important.
Just finally, Simon, what do you think about the role of Starmer, Macron, this call that is happening tomorrow, this sort of virtual coalition of the willing? How much is their influence happening at the moment? How important is it, do you think, at the moment, especially when you say correctly that Trump and Putin speaking is going to be the ultimate thing that seals this deal?
I think what's important is actually that it's a very evident symbol, and hopefully more than just a symbol, of our support for Ukraine. Because what's going to happen afterwards, at the moment we've got sort of captains and kings talking together on this, and it'll be very easy for them to perhaps get a ceasefire, and Putin signs a bit of paper, says give me a ceasefire. He's got an absolutely abysmal record of maintaining ceasefires, as President Zelensky tried to say to President Trump in the Oval Office. Putin has broken his word to Zelensky 25 times. Now, with that kind of record, I mean, Zelensky's absolutely right, President Zelensky's absolutely right. Ukraine needs to have a solid support behind it. And I think that's where the work of Prime Minister Starmer and President Macron is so important, trying to bring together this kind of coalition of the willing, so that when we have some kind of a ceasefire in place and we're moving towards a permanent ceasefire, Ukraine can be sure that their security will be maintained. Because otherwise we're just going to be a ceasefire that will suit everybody, suit Putin particularly. He'll reset and then he'll go again on some pretext. Because frankly, I don't trust him. I'm sure most people don't around the table either.
Simon, I just want to ask you about one other thing that Marco Rubio said. It was in regard to the Middle East, which I know you know an awful lot about as well. Let's see what Marco Rubio said about Hamas and where things stand with that. This is Marco Rubio in Canada today.
We believe they should all be released. Okay, and that, by the way, we talk about hostages, we're also talking about bodies. Okay, and these trades are being made, and they're ridiculous trades. I'm talking about 400 people for 3. These are nuts. And on top of that, you see the condition these people are being released in. So this is think about what we're talking about here. I mean, we're sitting around as the world sort of accepting that it's normal and okay for you to go into a place, kidnap babies, kidnap teenagers, kidnap people that have nothing to do with any wars, that are not soldiers, that are not anything, and taking them and putting them in tunnels for almost 1.5 years. And we're acting like if this is a normal exchange, this is a normal thing that happens. This is an outrage. So they should all be released. So I'm not going to comment on what we're going to accept or not accept, other than all of us. The whole world should continue to say that what Hamas has done is outrageous. It's ridiculous. It's sick. It's disgusting. It should never have happened. And we shouldn't accept it as normal, as a normal negotiation. We're just dealing with some savages. That's it. These are bad people, terrible people, and we need to treat them as such.
That's Marco Rubio there, the US Secretary of State, their foreign minister. Simon, I just wonder in regard to the Middle East, in terms of Gaza, in terms of Hamas talking to Israel about some form of version of a ceasefire, a handover of hostages and those bodies that Marco Rubio talks about. Where do you think we are with that?
we're in danger, as always, with this, of actually all falling apart. I read today that there'd been a reason for the Israelis to attack into Gaza, and the Palestinian Hamas-run Ministry of Health said 4 people have been killed. The danger with that is that whatever progress has been made so far starts to fall apart. And again, we have this issue that's been set. This is a dynamic that's been sitting there right from the very beginning with what's going on there. Is this about destroying Hamas as a military and political force, or is it now about removing or about rescuing the hostages? And that dilemma still remains. And I don't think we're going to get much further with that until we address some of the root causes. Here is one where I think the root cause is there. There's got to be a route out for the Palestinians that does not mean that they just disappear down into this cul-de-sac called violence. And at the moment, I don't see anything from the Americans saying they're going to do something about it. The deal that's still on the table is turning this into Mar-a-Lago Mediterranean. That's not an acceptable deal, completely unacceptable to the rest of the Arab population. Until America, and America is the only country who can do this, can persuade Israel, they need to find a way that does not require every 5 years, every 10 years, to have massive amounts of force applied to what's happened to the Palestinians, that I fear we're stuck. I mean, I hate it. I think hostage-taking is a wicked, wicked thing. Don't get me wrong. I think Hamas are an abysmal organisation. But beyond the kind of condemnation of their behaviours, there's also got to be recognition that most conflicts got a political cause. In this particular case, the political cause is there are millions of Palestinians who do not have a viable homeland, and everything that was promised them from 2005 onwards around finding some kind of solution, state solution, frankly, has been turned to dust. They've turned to violence. I think they're wrong to turn to violence, but that's where they feel they are. So, I mean, what I'd look for from Marco Rubio is the same kind of nuance and subtlety that he's trying to apply perhaps to the deal between Ukraine and Russia also needs to be applied to what's going on between Hamas and Israel. Condemn Hamas all you like, and I condemn them as well for what they did and the hostage-taking, but actually sometimes the issue about root causes is real, and that has not been addressed by him at all.
Thank you, Simon. Simon Diggins there, Colonel Simon Diggins, military and defence analyst there, former senior military officer in the UK Army. Lots to talk about there. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. We'll take some calls up to 7 o'clock, and then Kevin O'Sullivan takes over between 7 and 9 in this studio, and then what just happened between 9 and 10. We'll have that as well. Lots to discuss. I have quite a few texts coming in, including a very amusing one about Sabrina Carpenter I'm going to read out after the break.
If you lionise Hamas and terrorist organisations, you should be kicked out. And frankly, you should never step foot on British soil again. And I started to do that. I revoked the visas of 2 individuals who were falling well below the standards we should expect. Unfortunately, they then appealed, and activist judges in the High Court upheld their claim, and I believe they're still here in the UK. That's totally wrong. It sends out completely the wrong message. If you come to this country, respect our way of life, respect our values. Otherwise, you can get out and never come here again.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Chris in Newbury's been in touch and says, Peter, another socialist in James Mathewson pretending we can tax companies and workers to pay for unlimited benefits. The economic ignorance of the left is beyond me. Jane says, Labour government on about 14 years of Tories. What they must acknowledge is COVID happened while they were in opposition, but they agreed on everything and wanted lockdowns to continue. Both sides of this house are to blame for the mess now. Karen says, on the message you had on ADHD in Wales, just to point out that PIP isn't paid out just because you have a condition, it's on how much your condition affects you and how much help, adaptations, extra expenses you need or have. Barry says, thanks for having James Mathewson on, Peter. I fancied a cup of tea. Barry. Brian says, my wife used to work for a local council and couldn't accept a box of chocolates from a contractor at Christmas, but politicians can accept concert tickets as long as they are registered. Quite a few people getting in touch about that, actually, including Kenny in Edinburgh, who says, hi Cardi P, who on earth is Sabrina Carpenter? I'd understand if Rachel from accounts took John Bon Jovi tickets, but Sabrina Carpenter, she has terrible taste in music alone, and that should alone get Rachel Reeves sacked. Well, I would say it's all a matter of taste, as I would imagine Sabrina Carpenter would say as well. The best thing Ed Miliband could do to shore up support for climate change, says this texter, is to actually listen to the regular working class man on the street. Miliband doesn't care about the climate. He's just trying to make people know his name. He's just desperate for his 15 minutes to keep going. I think it's worse than that. I think he does care about the climate. Ralph in Liverpool says, James Mathewson said Labour are meant to be progressive. This highlights his youthful age. All he knows is a progressive Labour Party. Labour are meant to back the working class. It became progressive under Blair, and that's not its fundamental and historical ideology at all. Andrea has been in touch from Coventry. Andrea, what would you like to say? You're very welcome to the programme.
Thank you. Yes, it was just, I did hear, I think it was a Tory politician being interviewed recently on the radio. And when he gets given a gift, he either donates it to a charity raffle or to a charity auction. Now, wouldn't that be a wonderful example for these greedy Labour sort of freeloaders to follow?
Yeah, and actually it's good political sense as well. I worked for a politician, Andrea, who received a very expensive hamper, probably a few £100 actually, around Christmas time from a business, and he said to me as his advisor, what do you think I should do? And I said, you should give it to charity, and he did that, and that was the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good thoughts there, Andrea. Thanks for that. Stephen in Manchester, just quickly, Stephen, what would you like to say?
Okay, I'll do it as quick as I can. It's just in relation to obviously the welfare, the benefit cuts that they're proposing there. I'm quite a worried man, really. I'm 65 years old and I've pretty much only got a year to go to a pensionable age. Not sure whether I'm going to be involved in this, really, whether it's more to do with younger people rather than my situation.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really is quite, there's probably 8 years ago when I had a situation there where I got very badly hurt in work. The very people at the moment that I turned to was the likes of Jonathan Reynolds, who is my MP, who I've recently just contacted by email expressing this problem.
Right.
And I hope he stands there and, fights for the likes of myself. I've told him what I think.
Well, let's hope that works for you, and let's hope you get a good answer there. Stephen, sorry to cut the call short, but I just got to talk to Kevin O'Sullivan, who's coming up after 7 o'clock. Kevin, how are you doing?
How stupid is Chancellor Rachel Reeves? I mean, after all that storm,
You know, and she's going to say, I declared it. It's the look, it's the optics. Stop doing this. Don't tell me she's a Sabrina Carter fan.
Carpenter.
Carpenter, whatever her damn name is, I don't care. Nor does Rachel Reeves. I mean, basically, what she should have done on that night, if she wanted to go out, go for dinner. You know, pay for it yourself. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's these socialists. You offer them something free and they bite your hand off every time. There is nothing more scary in politics than a socialist with an expense account. Ask Sir Lindsay Hoyle.
What would you say, Kevin, to like the culture secretary going to the opera, for example, or to see a play? Would you be happy enough with that, or not?
I think the culture secretary is a slightly different case. There's reasons for them to go to various cultural events. It's not that under normal circumstances any of us would have anything to say about the Chancellor choosing weirdly to go and see Sabrina Carpenter or whatever her damn name is. It's just that given the Free Gear Keir storm, the the trouble that Labour went through, couldn't she see this might lead to problems? What is the matter with her?
It was so obvious, you got to wonder about their political sense.
Yeah.
Presumably you're covering that on your show, Kevin?
Well, we will now, yes.
Okay.
Also, Ed Miliband's crazy trip to China. I mean, what a waste of money and time that is. You know, 1,006...
I'm sure they're going to say, do you know what, we're going to turn off the coal-fired power stations because Ed Miliband says we should.
I think, you know, these Chinese, they're grown-ups. That juvenile idiot sitting across the table, they're going to leave that room and go, God.
Although I'll take capitalism over communism any day of the week.
No, I wouldn't take. I'll take communism over Ed Miliband every day of the week.
I'd take communism over Ed Miliband.
I'll take anything.
Wow.
I'll take anything over Ed Miliband. He's a disaster, an absolute disaster. We're also going to talk about the NHS. Look, I think that the devolution issue is at the centre of this. OK, NHS England under direct government control. There's probably only one way the NHS England could be run worse than it is now, and that is to give direct control to the government, but that's another issue. What about NHS Scotland? What about NHS Wales? They are even worse than NHS